Okay, guys,
Excellent.
I think we will get rocking. So good morning to everybody who has joined us for our third session this week on the EU's Green Deal with the Northern Western Regional Assembly. We're going to follow a similar format than we have all week. We have a number of speakers who will make their presentations, and towards the end of those presentations, if anybody has any questions, if they can pop them into the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll be able to take the questions at the end. In a second, I'm going to ask Councillor Enda Stenson to make the introduction. Then that'll be followed by Theresa Lenihan and Simon Pascoe in relation to the funding options and funding procedures and somewhat how to go about dealing with the funding instruments under the Green Deal. At 11:15 Irish time, we have Andreas Griffroy, who is a member of the Flemish Parliament and also a member of the Committee of the Regions, and he will speak about implementing the Green Deal in Flanders. And then at 11:30 Irish time, we have our two MEPs, Maria Walsh and Colm Markey, who will be joining us. And Colm, you're welcome already, right on cue, and we'll come back to you a little bit later. So if I could ask Councillor Enda Stenson maybe to open this morning's session.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much. And I just want to say I'm speaking here from the beautiful county of Leitrim, probably one of the safest parts of the world you could be in at this time with COVID virus and everything. We are extremely lucky. But I want to welcome you all here this morning to the Green Deal seminar. And this is in fact, it's the third day of this seminar. And firstly, I want to take the opportunity to thank all the speakers who have spoke during the week and my colleagues here in the North and Western Regional Assembly, and particularly the members of staff and David Minton and everybody who helps out to do an absolutely wonderful job in promoting this area, and long may they continue, because without them we'd be lost. I also want to welcome our friends from the Irish College in Leuven, and I see Theresa Lenihan there, our helper out in Brussels. Theresa, you're very welcome. But most of all, I just want to welcome all the attendees who have attended this week. And I know that there's over 210 people has attended all week from across the board. And it has been wonderful, because most days at least 80 people have shown up. And this shows the reach of the digital technology, as we have attendants from all over Ireland and right across the EU. And when this was first proposed to go ahead with this, I think people expected about 30 or 40 people to attend, but a lot of people have been blown away by the curiosity around this Green Deal. And my good friend and colleague over in Galway, Declan MacDonald, was here on Monday, and he called the Green Deal was really our North Star. And this region, and particularly our rural communities, can be the net benefactors of our transition if we plan this appropriately. But it needs to be a fair and a just transition. For anybody out there who doesn't know me, my name is Enda Stenson, and I'm a local councillor here in County Leitrim. I was first elected to Leitrim County Council in ¡99. I'm also a member of the Northern and Western Regional Assembly, and I'm extremely fortunate and have been lucky to be an active member of the Committee of the Region since for the last 8 years or so. So and it's a great position to be in, because everybody knows that the voice of the Committee of the Regions connects right across the regional assemblies, and that is extremely important. And the Committee of the Regions is becoming a very important player right across Europe, particularly for the regions. What we have learned throughout the week with the Green Deal being driven force, and the transformation is inevitable. But what should not be inevitable, though, is that any social or economic hardship should come on our regions. It is essential that we ease the transition and ensure that we bring all communities together. And we want to make sure that nobody is left behind, as often happens in some of our regions. And I know that this region is often deemed as the region in decline. We cannot allow that to happen. We have got to be right up there along with the rest. What we have seen when regions are left behind, and we have seen how it has impacted in Britain, particularly with Brexit, and that has resulted in a defranchising of the electorate, resulting in Brexit. And that's why a lot of people voted for the Brexit, because they felt they were being left behind. I would not want this to happen in our regions. And as you know better, I know that this region faces many challenges. I mean, a lot of people knows that. My very clear message is that the transformation should be inevitable. What should not be inevitable is that there should be social hardship. We must ease this transition by supporting local communities, no matter how remote they are, to recover from the COVID-19 and to regenerate their economics and upskill their workers for new and more sustainable jobs. And that's very important in this region. I will finish here and will welcome the first speaker. You will be glad to know that today is about money. Money is probably one of the most important things. It's not everything, but money is very important. EU funding can be very hard and difficult to access at times, but that doesn't have to be the case, because our colleagues in the North, Western and Regional Assembly are always assisting local groups and authorities and institutions and to access various and different types of EU funding programs, and they are delighted to help us. So I encourage you to reach out and ask for help and keep asking those questions, because it's very important. Now I will hand over to the first speaker, and I just want to thank you very much here from lovely Leitrim. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stenson, and thank you for joining us today as well. If I could introduce our first two speakers. So the first will be Theresa Lenihan. Theresa has recently been appointed as the head of the Irish Region's European Office in Brussels. She has overall responsibility for guiding local and regional authorities in Ireland through the EU policy and funding landscape. Theresa returns to Brussels, having previously worked in the EU sphere for UK and US business organisations, lobbying the EU institutions on the development of EU policy and funding programmes. Before joining the IREO, Theresa was head of research development at Ulster University, where she was responsible for increasing drawdown of research funding to the university. This included programmes such as Horizon 2020, the Interreg programmes, as well as UK and global funding sources. For 6 years prior to that, Theresa was programme manager at the Special EU Programmes Body, or SEUPB, and was responsible for managing Northern Ireland participation in a range of EU European Territorial Cooperation funding programmes. She also worked as at the Northern Ireland Local Government Association, building capacity of local government to access EU funding and to shape EU policy development. Theresa holds a BA in European Business Studies with French and a Master's of Business Administration with distinction, both from Ulster University. Theresa will also be joined this morning in this part of the presentation by Simon Pascoe. Simon has 25 years experience in working on EU affairs for British local and regional government in Brussels and the UK on a wide range of EU policy areas with an implication for local government service delivery. As an expert in European structural and investment funds through his experience in Wales and South West England, Simon has been recognised as an external evaluator by the European Commission. Simon was involved in advising major projects on EU funding packages, including the Eden project and the Combined University for Cornwall. In Torbay, he worked as an external funding manager preparing applications for regional and fisheries funds. Returning to Brussels in 2001, Simon worked as an advisor to the UK members of the Committee of the Regions and also wrote briefings and opinions for them on maritime safety and universal access to broadband. Since 2011, Simon has worked as a consultant specialising in networking and external funding services, providing a range of services to clients, including the European Commission, the European Network of Environmental Professionalists, the European Federation of Chief Executives in Local Government, the World Health Organization, and the Port of Ostend. Simon has contracted by the European Commission Visitor Service to speak to external groups that visit and to inform them on various EU policies. So I'll hand over to Theresa and then followed by Simon for the next hour and a half or so.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you for the introduction and also for the invite to come along today. As you've given a very thorough overview of my profile, and I'm familiar with many of the people in the Northwest Regional Assembly area from my previous experience. So just before I get started, I'm going to see if I can work the technology and share my slides. I think that should be working okay for everyone. So Good morning to all the participants, and certainly I find the sessions earlier in the week very useful, and I hope you have too, and I hope that this morning will also be equally as interesting. As Enda said, this morning is about getting the money, so I'm going to give you the overview of the programs. I'm going to advise you on how the programs work and give you some tips on how you need to organize yourselves to get the money. And then Simon, I think, is going to talk then about best practice and all of that. Anyway, I will be going through a range of funding programs that are connected to the Green Deal, and then the European, look at particularly at the Cohesion Policy family of programs, if you like, within Ireland, and those that Ireland are able to participate in the NWRA transnational world, if you like, and the cross-border program. I'll also touch a little bit on the Life Plus program. I think that's really important. And then, as I said, I'll talk a little bit about getting started with EU funding programs. So first, before I begin, if you don't already know who we are, and just to say that, you know, as David said, I've been head of the Irish Regions Office for about just over a year now. So I suppose I need to move away from the I'm a new person, because I'm not getting away with that much longer. But yeah, I've been in post over a year, and the Irish Regions European Office has been in existence for about 20 years in various guises. The Irish Regions European Office is a shared service for the 3 regional assemblies. So it's the 3 regional assemblies come together to have their voice heard in the European policy making field. And our overall aim of our strategy within the office is to deliver strategic and timely information and advice to the regional assemblies and then to their constituent local authorities in Ireland. So that's our core service to the local government family. Our overall raison d'etre, and the reason the office has been in place for over 20 years, is to support the Irish delegation to the Committee of the Regions. So as Enda has pointed out, he's a member of the Committee of the Regions, and I think it's fair to say over the last 20 years, the voice of the Committee of the Regions has only got stronger and is becoming a more and more important part of the decision-making process. So if you're not familiar with the Committee of the Regions, it's an assembly at European level, set up a little bit like how the European Parliament is set up. It has a delegation from every member state, and the Committee of the Regions analyses and takes opinions and takes views on EU policy and looks specifically at what the impact is on regions across Europe. And I'm really delighted to say that I work with a really good bunch of elected members from Ireland. Enda and his colleagues are very, very active within the Committee of the Regions, and I think the Irish delegation has a very strong presence and a very good influence within that body. So just a little bit about our objectives. As I said, it's about providing an effective secretariat for the Irish National Delegation. And that's about looking at how we can work together to ensure that the views of Ireland are put forward in a succinct way, and the views of Ireland at a regional level. So we're all the time looking at it from a local government and a regional perspective. Our other work is around raising the awareness and communicating the opportunities for participation in EU funding programmes. So it's about making the connections for you as the local government sector to be involved in EU funding programmes, guiding you through the process, helping you pinpoint where the key parts are that you should be involved in. We're also then looking for opportunities to build capacity and partnerships with other regions. As you'll hear me say later, a lot of the work is around working, a lot of the programs involve working across different regions of Europe. And, Brussels is home to hundreds of representation offices from other regions, and we have very good relationships with them, albeit they've been hampered slightly by the current situation, but we continue to make those partnerships. And a very important part of our role is seeking opportunities for influencing and EU policy developments. And I'm delighted you've got two of the MEPs here today, because working more closely with the MEPs is a key part of the work that we're doing and wanting to develop further. So because the European Parliament has a significant role in how policy is shaped, and it's important that we're feeding in the views of local and regional government. The other thing to note on that is that in normal times, the Irish Regions European Office is based within the same building as the Irish Permanent Representation. So that's the Irish government officials who are here working on EU policy developments on behalf of the government. So we work very closely with those colleagues and finding out what the position is. Doesn't mean that we always, as local and regional government, will want to follow or agree with everything the national government is saying, but it means that we are well informed of where their views are. We also work with and I'll talk more about this later, the national contact points that are based across each of the regional assemblies in Ireland. So we work with them hand in hand to highlight their role and to provide you with the guidance and support that they can provide as part of their role for providing you with that post or the pre-application stage, and then the post project development support. So that's another important part of our role. And also then raising the profile and the strengths of local and regional government in Ireland to our European partners and to the European institutions. So we're looking at the Week of Regions and Cities, and we're looking at the EU Green Week and the other various initiatives that are taking place, and seeing if there's an opportunity for where we can highlight the excellent work that's going on in Europe, or in Ireland, in the EU. So then EU funding opportunities in the context of the Green Deal. I suppose this is the bit you're probably really waiting for. So I took the slide from the Committee of the Regions, Green Deal going local, because that's how they look at the Green Deal. And I think that's a very good way of looking at it. What does it mean on the ground? So as Enda alluded to, it's about transformation of our agricultural and rural areas. It's about zero pollution across Europe. It's about leaving no region behind in terms of a transition, a just transition. It's about achieving climate neutrality. It's about looking at sustainable transport. And it's also looking at, how we protect our natural resources and how we move to, in terms of our businesses, how do we move to a circular economy? And, you'll have seen lots of work going on there. Just noticed last week, Coca-Cola have developed a new can, which is totally sustainable, and I think that's those types of initiatives at the high level and at the more local level are really important. So I suppose I put that slide up there to show that it's not just about environmental actions. I think you can see from across that range of areas that it's also about energy. Of course it is. It's about agriculture. It's about environment. It's about industry. It's about how we live, how we travel, where we go. So it's all of those things together. So, you can understand that it's about a mindset. It's not just it's a mindset change, but it's right across everything we do and everything that the EU is involved in. So I think that's important to note. I love the EU funding landscape, and I'm always trying to find where I can get more and more complex diagram of the EU funding landscape. This isn't the most complicated I came across, but it's only one of the most readable ones. So, I always say, when people say, where is EU funding available from, which parts of the Commission? And I say, well, if there's a policy coming from the Commission, there's normally a funding programme. There's a wide breadth of funding programmes right across, and that's not all of them, I have to say. And, I think we understand the breadth and the depth of the funding programme. The EU budget has been agreed at 1.8 trillion euros. So funding programmes are a huge part of that. And, you know, all programmes will be expected to contribute to the objectives of the EU Green Deal. So be that around life and around a lifestyle, how we live, how we travel, how we carry out our digital work, how we make things, how we manufacture things. Everything is going to be expected to contribute to the Green Deal. It's the EU's #1 policy priority. So this morning, I'm going to look at not all of these programs, should be glad to say, otherwise I'd be here for about 3 days. But I'm going to look at towards the bottom of your screen, the ERDF programme for Ireland, the family of interregs, A, B and C, so the cross-border transnational and the interregional programme, and just touch a little bit on the LIFE programme. And I'll come back to the others towards the end, just with a quick word on those. So in terms of cohesion policy for the next 7 years, the EU has agreed on 5 objectives, policy objectives, which will shape all of cohesion policy. So all ERDF, all interregs are shaped by these 5 policy priorities. So a smarter Europe through digitalization, economic transformation, and some support to small and medium businesses. A greener carbon-free Europe. So that's about implementing the Paris Agreement and investing in energy transition, renewables, and the fight against climate change. So in terms of your EU Green Deal, there it is, #2 priority on this list. A more connected Europe with strategic transport and digital networks. #4 is a more social Europe, so delivering on the European Pillar of Social Rights and supporting quality employment, education, skills and social inclusion, and equal access to healthcare. And then the 5th objective is around a Europe closer to citizens. So a bit referring back to what Enda said at the start, you know, it's really important that citizens understand how Europe is working and how Europe is delivering for them. I think it's really important, and you know, in the context of Brexit and post that, we really want to be ensuring that citizens understand what the benefits are of the EU and how they can be involved in shaping the future of the EU. This particular objective within the cohesion policy objectives lends itself to supporting locally led development. So I think we will come back to this a little bit later. That's at the local and probably at the regional level, how Europe can deliver for citizens. And it also then looks at sustainable urban development across the EU. So in towns and cities, how Europe is delivering. Oops, sorry, apologies. Okay, so in terms of the family and the EU policy funding, or the EU funding scene, these 2 programs here, European Regional Development Funding and the Recovery and Resilience Facility, are 2 that are shared management between the member state, i.e. Ireland in this case, and also then the European Commission. So the programs are developed in conjunction with those 2 bodies. The European Regional Development Fund is the one you're probably very much familiar with. Northwest Regional Assembly is a managing authority for that programme currently and will continue to be a managing authority, and therefore will have an operational programme for the Northwest Regional Assembly area. The programme is about furthering cohesion policy, but also looking at combating regional disparities and ensuring that no region across Europe is left behind. For this programming, for the new programming period 21-27, the European Regional Development Fund will be approximately about 396 million for the entire island of Ireland. The Republic of Ireland, and it's split into 2 regions. for the purposes of funding. So the more advanced regions and the less developed region. And the Northwest Regional Assembly is a region in transition, so it will receive 60% co-financing from the EU, as opposed to the more developed regions getting 40%. So the policy objectives that Ireland have chosen are a smarter Europe, a carbon-free Europe, and a Europe closer to citizens. So within that, I think it's about 20% has to be dedicated to a greener, carbon-free Europe. So very strong focus on the green agenda within that programme. But as I said, it's not forgetting how the other two objectives can also contribute to the Green Deal and a green transition. I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of that, and that the two come hand in hand. In terms of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, I actually shouldn't have called that the National Recovery and Resilience Facility. It should be it's the EU Recovery and Resilience Facility, and it's the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. So so this was agreed just before Christmas, and since then, very, very short turnaround. The EU, so it was agreed at EU level, and an allocation was agreed, an allocation of grants was agreed for each member state. And for Ireland, for 2021 and 2022, Ireland will receive 853 million. And this, as the name suggests, this programme is to help Ireland recover and help every member state recover from the current crisis, the current pandemic. So each member state has been asked to produce a plan, and in a very short time scale, I think it's the end of April, the plan must be submitted to the European Commission for approval. And each national plan must address the main challenges that it faces as a country under 6 pillars. Up there, front and centre, is the green transition. And as you can see, 37% of the funding must be allocated to this priority. So that's a huge amount of the overall total, the highest amount to that priority. The other priorities, as you can imagine, in line with the overall priorities I outlined to you for cohesion policy and for the EU in general, digital transition, 20% must be allocated to this priority. Smart, sustainable and inclusive growth, and that's about economic development, social and territorial cohesion, health and economic, social and institutional resilience. So that's about being able to be prepared for any future crises that come our way. And then policies for the next generation, children and young people, including education and skills. And right across all of that, across all of those priorities, anything that Ireland wants to do or any member state wants to do in terms of investments and reforms must respect the do no significant harm principle. So there cannot be a detrimental impact on the environment from any of the work that is ongoing there. So the Department of the Taoiseach is managing this. A public consultation was held, which just closed there on Monday of this week. And as 3 regional assemblies, jointly, we submitted a response to that, and each regional assembly also then submitted their specific ideas and plans around projects to be funded through this. And I should have said that it's 853 million for 2021 and 22, and then there may be further funding in 2023 depending on the economic situation within the country at that time. So I think that's important to say that at the EU funding that's coming to national level is very, very focused on achieving the objectives of the Green Deal. Moving on then to European territorial cooperation programmes and Ireland's participation within these programmes. So you probably call them Interreg programmes, and that's fine, because that's, I think, what we all used to call them all and still do fondly. And as I said earlier, there are 3 strands. The cross-border strand, and you see I've used old maps, so forgive me because I still have parts of the UK in programmes which because the new programming areas haven't been confirmed yet. But over here, I was having great fun with my doodles here. So over here is Northern Ireland and the border region of Ireland, and we leave Scotland out for the moment, but Northern Ireland border region of Ireland, cross-border cooperation programme, and huge amounts of the Northwest Regional Assembly area are in this programme, and that's the what would have been the Peace programme and the NWRA cross-border programme, and is now the Peace Plus programme, so you're probably fairly familiar with that. In terms of transnational funding programmes, here we have the Northwest Europe programme. Now we've got to exclude the UK, and we may be adding a few other countries or parts of countries in or regions in this, but Northwest Europe programme, the eligible area is the Ireland, and then these other parts of, as we would say, Northwest Europe. The Northern Peripheral and Arctic programme, you can see here, very small, but the west coast of Ireland included in this. And then these peripheral areas of Norway, Sweden and Finland. And I shouldn't have blanked out these guys because they're also in it. Norway, Sweden, or sorry, Faroe Islands, Greenland and Iceland are all in that programme. And here then the Atlantic area, again, taking out the UK part, but Ireland, France, top and bottom of Spain and all of Portugal. And there is some talk about how that programme area may or may not change, because this is it's all under discussion at the moment. Sorry. Here then, I wanted to show then we have interregional cooperation, which is basically working with all of the member states, a huge programme, which is a slightly different focus than the others, and I'll come back to that, but it's working with everybody in the EU. So just to start then on where the Green Deal features in these programs, and I don't have time to go into the detail of every single part of this program, but in terms of the Peace Plus program, and just so that you don't get caught up in the name, the Peace Plus program is basically a coming together of the old Peace program and the NWRA cross-border program, and it's looking at building economic and social cohesion. So it has a lot of the actual peace building activities around communities and the peace local action plans, which you probably are familiar with, but it's also looking at economic regeneration and transformation, but it's also looking at healthy communities and empowering our young people, rural development and regeneration. And it's also looking very strongly, and you can see there a whole theme on supporting a sustainable future around biodiversity, nature, recovery, resilience, marine and coastal management, water quality, and catchment management, water quality improvement programs, and sustainable transport. So as the Northwest region, the majority of your region is eligible for the Peace program, the Peace Plus program. It's normally the specific eligible areas, normally the counties that border, that are on the border, but there may be more flexibility, geographical flexibility around this program this time round, given that it's about €1 billion. So it's a huge program, and okay, it has lots of themes and lots of objectives, but a very strong focus on the environmental issues. In terms of the Northwest Europe programme, so those parts of Belgium, the Netherlands, Northern France that are in that programme area. Again, these programmes are being developed literally as we speak, but very, very strong focus on the Green Deal priorities and the transition towards a greener economy. You can see here in terms of the draft priorities of this program, you see smart climate resilience, #1 priority. #2 priority, smart and just energy transition. #3 is around transition towards a place-based circular economy. #4 is around innovation. number 5, around transition towards a socially inclusive and resilient society. This programme is currently open for consultation until the 20th of March. So if you have partners, or you've previously worked with partners in the Netherlands, Belgium, Northern France, and the other programme areas, this is one tip. You may wish to have a look at the programme and how it's developing, and also respond to the consultation, and I'll give you the websites later. The Northern Periphery and Arctic programme, again, as the name would suggest, it's about peripherality and rurality, and it's around looking at those areas. So those, as I used to always think of it when I lived in Northern Ireland, it's all those countries above us that we don't always think about when we think about Europe. So Iceland, Greenland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, the northernmost parts of those programs are those countries. And the program is really around strengthening the innovation capacity of these areas. It's also around strengthening the capacity for climate change adaptation and resource sufficiency. So you can imagine the rural and peripheral areas, and that part of Ireland that's involved in that is very much considered in that rural and peripheral area. And literally this program is being developed as we speak, because simultaneously there's another seminar on today around shaping these priorities. And the third one then is around strengthening the organisational capacity amongst the communities to make better use of cooperation opportunities. So really good opportunities within this program. Not a massive program, but a very nice program to get involved in, to further develop. And it's small, it's intimate, and it's a really good opportunity to dip your toe in the water for transnational funding programs. The Atlantic Area programme then, as you can see, and again, the name would suggest, is a focus on the Atlantic. So very much around a maritime theme and the benefits of the Atlantic to all of us. And I very kindly got the slide from Brendan Mooney yesterday, and very much this is a draft of the types of initiatives, so it's not set in stone, and it probably will come out to consultation later in the year, but I just wanted to give you a feel for the importance that the programme is also putting on the greener Europe. So looking at the greener Europe from a blue perspective in terms of the Atlantic Ocean. So promoting energy, you can see there priority 2 is around promoting energy efficiency measures, promoting renewable energy, developing smart grids, promoting climate change adaptation, and promoting biodiversity. You'll also see then over on a more social Europe, strengthened tourism and the role of social inclusion and social innovation. And then obviously the smarter Europe is the priority 1 around the research innovation and the blue innovation. So using the assets we have in the blue economy as best we can. And I think again comes back to that holistic approach, that it's not just let's do things that protect the environment per se. We need to be doing the entire full remit of work across each of the priorities. Interreg Europe, just a brief word about this. This programme is slightly different in that the other programs are around working transnationally and working with other partners to produce a product or a service and addressing a problem at a transnational level. This programme, Interreg Europe, is more about exchange of experience, and it's particularly suited to policymakers, so regional assemblies, local government, local authorities, around how others across Europe come together to tackle problems or issues in terms of addressing the policies, and what other maybe other rural or peripheral regions or other towns or other regional authorities or assemblies across Europe did to develop a policy area. So I think that's a really nice programme also to get involved in, and that's across the 27 member states, and a few other non-EU countries can also participate in that as well. Wanting to bring all of that together, each program is unique and each program is different and each program has a slightly different culture to it. And it's only when you get involved that you understand the sort of nuances between each program. But what I would say, what I tried to do here was put together in one slide the characteristics of all of the ETC programs, and in some ways you could almost say this for most EU programs, but based on what I've given you in terms of NWRA, European Territorial Cooperation programs, the characteristics really are various priorities, as you saw, in line with EU strategies, but they all, as I've demonstrated, have a significant focus on the EU Green Deal priorities. And my thoughts about around getting involved is, why would you get involved in a transnational EU funding program? In fact, it doesn't matter if it's cross-border or transnational. What is the issue or the problem that you're seeking to address? I think that's the first question you need to ask yourself. And then you need to ask is, why is it a transnational issue? So why can't it be solved at national level? You have to be able to demonstrate that there's a European added value. So, why would the EU give you money to fund this project? And why is it funding you at a transnational level to work with other partners? So I think you really got to ask yourself those questions. All of the programs operate on the basis that we're in a sort of a period where the programs are being developed. So at the very, very high level, the programs are being developed. But when they're developed and agreed by all of the member states and the European Commission, then calls for proposals will be issued. And they'll normally be issued by the program secretariats that are based across Europe. There's no real fixed time scales to these. They tend to come out as and when, but the closer you are to the program secretariat or to the national contact points, the better, because you get to understand what's coming up. Project applications require a partnership. And I suppose, when you think about it, this is the raison d'etre for the EU, that we work to address problems in a common way. So you need partners from across different member states, and you need at least 3 normally, but an average of probably 5 to 6, depending on the program. And you must be able to outline that there's a clear role for each partner. So, having read hundreds of these project applications in the past, if you're just sticking some partner in just because they're your friend, it's not going to work. There needs to be a clear role, and you need to. A really good project will have different expertise addressing the problem, so you're all coming together for the greater good and producing that European added value. All projects will require an element of match funding, so none of those ETC programs are 100% funded. Their match funding is required. Now, generally staff time can be counted as a match funding, and you get an overhead rate, which is very helpful. But you need to think of that in terms of in a local authority or whatever organization you're in. What is your source? And I also, when I used to work on these programs in the past, used to say, how liquid is your organization? Because remember, you're paying all this money out up front. You're getting it claimed, vouched and verified locally, and then you're getting it paid back. So you've got to have a period of liquidity that your organization can support that. What's your project hoping to achieve? What is your project's aims and objectives? You've got to be very clear about that. And how will you know it's successful? You need to be able to measure your success. Just a few slides now on LIFE and the LIFE programme. So the LIFE programme for 2021 to 27 is obviously a continuation of the previous programme with an increased budget. So you can see there's a €2 billion increase. And there are 2 main fields of action, which then divide into sub-programmes. So there's an environmental theme and there's a climate action theme. And under the environmental theme, nature and biodiversity, and circular economy and quality of life are the 2 sub-programmes. And with under climate action, it's around climate change mitigation and adaptation and the clean energy transition. In terms of the characteristics of this programme, slightly different feel this programme has, in that you don't need transnational partners for all of these projects. Some parts of it you might, but it's really a bottom-up program where you can generate high-quality applications for what they call as standard action projects. So standard action projects develop, demonstrate, and exchange innovative methods for meeting environmental and climate objectives. It's also about implementing best practice in relation to nature and biodiversity and contributing to better environmental governance. Then there's another set of projects that are strategic integrated projects, and these are compliance support tools for catalyzing implementation of key environmental plans over large areas. And then there's a third section around NGO operating grants, and that's for improving involvement of civil society. So again, a very good program in terms of accessing support for Green Deal priorities and protecting the environment. You'll be glad to hear I'm almost coming to an end. I put this slide up as a back to my earlier point around the complexity and the difference and the range of EU programs. And I suppose I wouldn't necessarily, my advice to you isn't necessarily to think about, I'm going to pursue that program per se. What I would say is pursue your project, think about your project, and then talk to us in the Irish Regions European Office, talk to the Regional Assembly, talk to the national contact points, talk to the relevant people and the experts around guiding you to the right program. So I think sometimes we get hung up on following the program as opposed to working out what it is our project wants to do. Just gonna, and on that, I suppose in terms of getting started with EU funding, I've got a few slides that that I'd like to share in terms of how to think about starting. You know, because I know this is overwhelming. There's a lot of information, and how do you work through it? And I suppose if you're sitting in your organization this morning, you think, okay, what is it we're about? So within our organization, do we have a strategic plan? Do we have a work plan? Have we got a number of projects that we want to deliver on? And can EU funding contribute to delivering this? So you might be saying, well, you know, we're thinking about building an innovation park in Sligo or Galway or Donegal. But you need to think about, well, is EU funding the right source for this? So, you know, think about that. And then that's your sort of starting point. I also say on a very practical level, think about the resources for driving and leading projects, because sometimes people are working within an organization and then it's like, oh no, now I've got an EU project and now and there's not enough resource for it. So, you know, in some ways this is also for the senior leadership of your organization to think about where the resources are. If you're really committed to getting EU funding projects, you need resources in place. And then you need effective collaboration across the relevant departments on the different areas. So there's no point somebody in the economic development part of a local authority chasing money that somebody who's maybe looking after the environment and looking at circular economy, and they haven't joined forces. And then I also say this, and I think this is really important, and certainly from my previous experience in larger, for example, in the university and larger organizations suffer more from this. You need the appropriate expertise and collaboration across the organization. Getting involved in EU funding, and I know those of you who have been involved in funding from SEUP will probably be acutely aware of this. You need your HR practices in place, you need your procurement practices in place, you need your financial practices in place, and you need your communication practices in place that meet EU requirements. And that's really important, because otherwise you'll have spent the money and you won't get the money paid back if there's any kind of problems with verification of the expenditure. And again, I said, think about the match funding, how much is needed and what sources will you use. And I used to say when I did this work in Northern Ireland in the past, you know, don't think of it as, and particularly if it's something in your strategic plan, don't think of it as something that's, oh, I have to go and find all this match funding. You know, if you were in your strategic plan committing 100% of your council budget to a project, and then you can get some of it from EU sources. You sort of change your mindset around and think, well, I can actually bring in some money to do this, as opposed to thinking it's an added headache for you. I also say that always give the advice around joining appropriate EU networks. You know, it's really important to be in the right networks, and you know, Irish Region's European Office is a source of that for you. Think about the cost, the time, and the resource involved for being involved in networks, and don't just join for the sake of joining. They've got to be able to give you something, and you've got to be able to commit time and effort to it. And then externally, what you need to consider about getting involved is, you know, what partners do you need to deliver your project? And I ask this question all the time: what are your partners at local level? So it's not, I know the projects, and in order to get the funding, you need to think, and I'm telling you to think about your other European partners, but really, really important as well is to think who are the other key players. So if you're sitting in Donegal and you're thinking you were doing something on research and innovation, you know, think about Letterkenny Institute of Technology. What can they do to help you? And then how can you link with other European partners? Identify the suitable program, that after you've got your project in place, and then talk to the experts, the national contact point, whose contact details I'll be giving you now, the Irish Region's European Office, myself and my colleagues, and the regional assemblies. And then ensure your project fits with the relevant call for applications. So just don't make it fit for the sake of it. There'll be another call in the same program or a different program. And then talk to other organizations that have already been involved, and they give you a really good example or really good experience of how it was for them. And then if you're approached by someone else, which I know this happens all the time, you know, you might come to an event in Brussels and you meet so-and-so from Spain, and he asks you to be involved in the project. Do you want to be involved? You need to go back to your strategic fit. Is it relevant? Does it fit with the priorities of your organization? Because then you end up, if it doesn't fit there, you end up shoehorning it in. And then the other thing is, you know, when you're looking at EU networks, which ones are the appropriate ones? So there are the national contact points for the European Territorial Cooperation Programmes in Ireland. So you're probably all very familiar, and I'm sure he's online. Brendan Mooney is the national contact point. He's based in the North West Regional Assembly, and he looks after the Atlantic Area Programme, the Northern Periphery and Arctic Programme, and the Interreg Europe Programme. And then the Southern Regional Assembly holds the national contact point for Northwest Europe, and then they share Interreg Europe with the Northwest Regional Assembly. And then Mike Brennan in the Eastern and Midland Regional Assembly looks after the URBACT programme, which is about developing cities across Europe, which we haven't focused on today. I've given you also the websites for the various programs. Now, what I would say is just because you're in the Northwest region and you might be interested in the Northwest Europe programme, it doesn't mean you can't contact the Southern Regional Assembly. The contact points operate across all of Ireland, so you are obviously able to contact any of them for the relevant programme. So that was a whistle-stop tour. That is my contact details. And if I can just make a last plea attempt, if you have not signed up to the Irish Region's European Office newsletter, could I ask you to sign up to it? Due to data protection regulations, we can't sign you up. You've got to sign yourself up. So I'm going to leave you with the IREO newsletter subscribe page, and I look forward to hearing from you in the questions, and I look forward to you receiving our future newsletters, which the next one should be coming out in April. So thank you very much for your time this morning.
That's great, Theresa. Thank you very much for that. And just before Simon, there was a question. I think people may have been frantically scribbling all their notes on that wealth of information down. But Margaret Talbot was asking, will the slides and the recording be made available? And yes is the answer to both. And Theresa will send it, and we'll send out all the slides for the week next week. And also we have the recordings, so again they will be made available too. So there's no need to be trying to take everything in today. You'll be able to digest it at your own time a little later. So Simon, I'm going to hand over to you now to continue the session. Thank you.
Okay, am I nice and clear there, David?
Yeah, we can hear you and see you.
Great, I'll put myself on full screen then. You have to let me know if there's any questions. I won't be able to see them for the time being, but we'll. There we go. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can. We can, yeah. We see it in a bit of a share format, but yeah, we can see it.
It should be coming through in full screen any second. Okay, well, thank you for inviting me, David. Thank you, everybody, and good morning. I'm going to pick up from some of the things Theresa said at the end there, because they're absolutely fundamental to being successful in securing different forms of European funding. I think one of the vital things is to stick to your plan, and I think that's the most valuable thing that we've discussed this morning so far, because you can get diverted and pulled slightly off track. I know that experience of the European Week of Regions and Cities, where you can meet some particular representative of our region rather excited about a project, and you can get drawn into it very rapidly. But again, it's just checking that against the organisation priorities back at home. Sorry, my screen's a bit slow here. Right, just a little bit about me, because I'm actually slightly different, because I'm actually working in the private sector. I'm a consultant at the moment, and I'm supporting a number of organisations deliver projects. So I'm helping partly with actual project management, and some of those things Theresa mentioned about cash flow are my daily angst, because I'm involved in some very significant Interreg projects on one side of the house, working on the Tiger project, which is an Interreg channel project, covering 6 pilot sites in France and England, looking at tidal stream energy. I'm actually attached to Morbihan Hydro Energies in Brittany. Those of you working on the Atlantic programme should know Sabella. It's quite a well-known Breton medium-sized company specialising in 10-metre tidal stream turbines. They've actually got 2 deployed at the moment in the Ushant Straits. And we've also had previous conversations with colleagues in Donegal about smaller scale port and estuary vicinity turbines as well in the past. So certainly the Tiger project's worth a look, and when you get this presentation, you'll get the links to these projects as well, so you can have a look at them. Changing hat completely, I'm working on another domain, which is that of destination management and tourism. Interreg is playing a big role in driving experiential shoulder season tourism outside the main season. And of course, with the COVID recovery and its impact on tourism, it looks as though the shoulder season is going to be our first season back, essentially. And so we're working very actively with, again, six pilot regions across England and France, looking at how we can develop this out of season tourism attraction by building on those experiential, hands-on experiences that people want to do, and particularly getting destinations and individual businesses working together in those destinations. So with that, I'm attached to an organisation called To Go to Places, otherwise known as Visit Kent, who are very active in European funding, and of course quite active in managing European projects for a very long time with their colleagues across the border in the Pas-de-Calais. Apart from that, I spent a bit of time working on maritime projects, been involved in port projects with the Port of Ostend, very heavily working on particularly building on the hub that the offshore renewable wind energy industry creates. There's a massive push in the North Sea at the moment, and we're on our 6th wind farm field, or wind farm array, and of course that's creating whole shoreside infrastructure that's driving other blue growth opportunities as well. So again, it's worth having a look at the Port of Ostend's website. There's all the European projects are there, and you can learn more about the hub that they're building there in West Flanders. I do have a little association role as well in Brussels when I've got a spare day. looking after UDEEP. It's the Association of European Chief Execs. They're very much interested in the European Week of Regions and Cities, communication events, getting involved in projects. We recently partnered a Horizon 2020 project looking at low carbon energy and public authorities using green taxation to drive green measures. So there is a number of interests there from the chief execs, and of course the County and City Management Association, CCMA in Ireland, is active, and Tim Lucy, their chairman from County Cork, is very active in our network at the European level. So moving on then, the presentation, I won't go through all the slides because I know over the last few days we've touched on quite a lot of these issues, but I'm going to very quickly get on to the part 2, which is all about maximizing the regional impact from opportunities that are available, and it will join up with what Theresa said at the end of her presentation today. So I think the challenge for us all now is to adapt the external funding strategy to the 2021-2027 period and understand the impact of that next generation EU to supercharge, if you like, the main EU multi-annual framework towards recovery, green and digital futures. The Green Deal, a lot has been said about the Green Deal in the last few days, but let's not forget the link to that Digital Europe programme as well, because that digital connection with the Green Deal is there. It's seemingly becoming the post-COVID recovery package, the new growth strategy for the EU, driving investment to achieve that carbon neutrality by 2050, stimulating the transition to a decarbonised economy. And of course, this allocation they want to see of between 20 and 30% going to Green Deal type objectives in all funds is quite important. We've talked about the highly carbonised regions in the last few days. We've got the issue within Ireland, of course, about the prioritisation between the regions and which regions are looking for that support directly. Again, I don't have anything additional to say about that point that we discussed, I think, on Monday, but certainly I'll touch a little bit on some of the other funds which you could also focus on to try and broaden out the opportunities for the North and the West. Again, part 1, a little bit first of all about the next generation EU boost for that EU 2021-27 multi-annual framework budget. You've got to take the starting point as that economic backdrop. You know, that massive drop in gross domestic product in Europe, and the European Union needed to find a solution to show how they're going to help, if you like, repair the economy in the short term. There's a massive EU public and private investment gap of at least 1.5 trillion in 2020 and 2021. And of course, a lot of shortfalls caused by that crisis. And of course, by the strategy is to invest in green and digital transitions as a way of repairing and rebuilding those critical value chains. They're concerned about the single market being threatened, the deep interlinkages between economies being damaged, and certainly learning the lessons from the 2008-9 financial crisis, which is of vital importance to all of us to make sure we don't make the same mistakes again. But let's start with the framework. And I draw to your attention the colours here, because the main budget, the main multi-annual framework is about €1 trillion. It's a very sizable EU budget already, one of the largest yet. But of course, what's happened here is this next generation EU is coming on top of it, bringing in these additional resources. And I'm going to talk a little bit more this morning about that, so we understand where that money's coming from. We understand how it's going to be repaid, but we also understand how it's going to be dispersed, essentially, which is what we're interested in. So what it does, Next Generation EU, is it creates this larger headroom over and above the main usual multi-annual financial framework and the usual ways in which the EU budget is financed through member state contributions and proportions of VAT and so on and so forth, by actually now allowing the European Commission to go out to the markets and issue bonds. They're busily issuing bonds in the Luxembourg Stock Exchange at the moment to draw this money in so they can provide this additional funding through this Next Generation EU mechanism. Again, let's just pose for a moment to ask ourselves how they're going to, those funds that they've raised, how they're going to repay them. And of course, they're setting the objective of repaying them certainly after 2027, but by 2058 at latest. And there are some options there as to how the EU will recover this ground. So the emissions trading scheme, things like own resource based operations, carbon border adjustment mechanism, and the digital tax on companies, quite a high profile one there, of course, with a turnover with larger turnovers. So there's a number of ways which the Commission is already thinking about how it will recover the investments that it's currently raising. If we look at essentially the 6 headline areas of the multi-annual framework, you can see in the blue column the breakdown, if you like, between the single market, innovation, digital operations, the cohesion policies, some of the things that Theresa has just talked about with Interreg and so on and so forth. The Common Agricultural Policy, of course, sitting there under heading 3. And some of the others, migration, border management, resilience, security, neighborhood, and the wider world. And in the orange column, you can see the figures, and I'll leave this slide for you to look at afterwards in terms of the boost all these programs have got. So if you've traditionally looked at the LIFE program, take another look, because the LIFE program in this period is going to be 60% bigger than it was in the last funding period. So certainly the total column, the column on the end there, is the column we're looking at, that 1.8 trillion, and certainly is a very, very sizable amount of money. But of course, I'm going to focus more on the sectorial programs, because Theresa's talked about the shared management programs, which are run in the region. But of course, there are the centrally administered programs, which come from the Commission and come through those agencies which the Commission funds. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in detail a bit later. But let's look at the, if you like, how the EU budget is being powered up to deal with this recovery. There are 3 pillars. One of the pillars we know about, we've been discussing it over the last 3 days, and this is the support that member states are getting to manage that recovery. And in that little list there, you can see that centerpiece of the EU, the Next Generation EU program, which is the Recovery and Resilience Facility. You can also see the Just Transition Mechanism and Just Transition Fund sitting in there. And of course, that is very much run through this semestrial process where member states put their plans forward, and the EU institutions, the Commission, will review and make recommendations to the European Council as to what these funds should be used on in terms of addressing that. But let's not forget the second pillar, where we're trying to re-kickstart the private sector economy. And certainly the solvency support instrument, you know, we could well see companies like Ryanair and others popping up in this, because this is a support program for companies that are viable but are in a short-term situation as a result of COVID and the pandemic. So there's a lot of interest there. The Invest EU program, think about the role of the European Investment Bank, because they're playing an important role in this second pillar. And certainly there we are talking here not just about grants, but talking about loans as well when it comes to repayable finances, or affordable repayable finances as well. And finally, the boost to the health programs, the boost to civil defense, the boost to all those issues where we're trying to learn from the lessons of the crisis there in the third pillar. And just very briefly, here are some of the individual headings of that Next Generation EU program, Pillar 1, Pillar 2, and Pillar 3. And I'll leave these slides for you to look at afterwards in terms of the resources that are going in from the Next Generation EU program resource into those different instruments. Pillar 1, of course, the key part which we're interested in is the European Recovery and Resilience Facility. It can be used for investments and reforms, including green and digital transitions. It's grants and loans by implementing member states' national recovery and resilience plans. And I'll come on to those in a second, defined in line with the objectives of the European semester. So again, there's this relationship with a member state and European Union with you in the region, which is an important thing to bear in mind. So this Recovery and Resilience Facility has a number of things. So in terms of a region, you need to think about the dialogue with the capital, with Dublin, over some of these priorities that they will be establishing in your region, because there's going to be some larger amounts of money coming through this to deal with broadband issues, to deal with energy efficiency in buildings and the housing stock, possibly dealing with the sustainable transport and charging station issues, clean technologies and renewables. Let's think about hydrogen, think about ports, let's think about the connection between some of these renewable energies and the fuels of the future. So there are some interesting ones, and not to forget the digital agenda there as well as education and training to support digital skills. So there's a lot there that's going on. Certainly public administration will be there in terms of the push to improve the services that it provides online. But again, it's the member state which is working with the EU to shape this and ensure that their plans are recognised. So in terms of that dialogue with the member state over this particular mechanism, we still looks as though by the 30th of April, member states will be looking to submit their final plans. And of course, that will unfold with the Commission reviewing that, making recommendations to the European Council. And then, if you like, upfront support finances being paid within 2 months by the Commission to get those projects rolling. So essentially, this is a flow chart showing you how the recovery and resilience facility will actually work in practice. There are even some examples which I found online which are worth, I just put the links here. It's a bit rough and ready, but I thought I'd put the links here for you so you could actually look at some of the examples of what the EU is thinking to have as projects, suggested projects to actually encourage member states and regions to come up with in their plans. But again, I'll leave those for you to look at afterwards. It's worth bearing in mind there's a new Directorate General in the European Commission to support reform. It's overseen, I've noticed, by the Regional Policy Commissioner, because I think the regional policy and structural investment fund mechanisms will be important to dispersing some of these funds. But certainly the Reform DG is there in Brussels, which is overseeing that. There is actually quite a lot of technical assistance to support the next generation EU programs and the Just Transition Fund. So we've got a number of the big four companies that we all know well involved in those technical assistance programs in all member states, including Ireland, helping the member states to build capacity around those projects that they've identified for the regions and how to make them work in reality. And the European Union is pushing member states to use this technical assistance money to actually prepare projects effectively. So again, DG Reform, important DG in the Commission. I don't propose to go over the 3 pillars in too much detail, but I've put the slides in for you here to look at afterwards. Just gives you the breakdown, gives you a short description of what the funds are going to be used for. So we've got the recovery assistance and cohesion element there, additional funding in 2020, 2022, which is going into those cohesion fund programs, and certainly helping to try and grants from municipalities, hospitals, member states, authorities with no national co-financing required. The Just Transition we've talked about. It breaks down, of course, into 3 pillars, certainly with the Just Transition Fund, the Investing EU Just Transition Scheme, and the EIB Public Loan Facility. So there are grants as well as loans under that pillar. As I mentioned, under the Pillar 2, the Solvency Support Instruments, which is essentially providing equity to viable companies in economic sectors that have taken a hit from the coronavirus pandemic. So again, companies within the region may want to be looking at this one with a view to getting a dialogue moving with key organisations within Ireland that are linking in with the European Investment Bank. Of course, the Enhanced Invest EU under Pillar 2 as well is there, and the Pillar 3, of course, with the health programme and the civil protection mechanisms, etc., to help really with the recovery from that pandemic. Now, as I mentioned before, the sectoral programs are getting a boost from this Next Gen EU as well. So the Horizon Europe programme, which is the replacement research and innovation programme to Horizon 2020, is going to be getting a boost, and its total budget is looking like just over 94 billion euros. And those funds are nearly ready to roll in Brussels. There is a number of things going on at the moment. I'll come on to that, which are moving forwards. But one other program I want to draw your attention to is the Digital Europe program, which is going to be an important program, and potentially some of your companies in the region could be looking at that closely. The Connecting Europe facility as well has received a boost. It focuses on rail transport, road transport, certainly ports, maritime transport, and is very keen on any of synergies between certainly transport logistics, but also with the blue growth renewable energy agenda as well. So it's certainly a fund worth looking at. And there are indeed increasing loans available from the European Investment Bank connecting to it in debt facilities as well for Connecting Europe. So the Horizon Europe program, I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes on this, just to draw your attention to a couple of key elements of this program, which from a local and regional perspective are worth considering in the future. First of all, it's worth saying that the Horizon Europe program is 14 times bigger than the original framework program. So we're looking at a very sizable amount of money, between 94 and 95. Some of these figures are varying a bit because obviously the agreement on the budgets was relatively recently secured. Horizon Europe breaks down into 3 pillars. There's a pillar 1 for open science, pillar 2, which is global challenges and industrial competitiveness, and then you've got the innovation pillar, pillar 3. I'm essentially going to talk to you at a local and regional level about pillar 2 and pillar 3, because it's there you've got the climate, energy, and low carbon agenda, and certainly under the innovation pillar, the European innovation ecosystem. But there are other elements which could be worthwhile following. So certainly with the European innovation ecosystems, there's going to be 500 million for these ecosystems published in the coming months. We expect the work programs formally to be published in April by the European Commission. Although for those of you that are good at hunting around the internet, you will find there are various iterations that are already circulating online. I found one looking last night, which was the European Innovation Ecosystem Draft. If you look carefully down in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a Read More tab there. Click on it, download the draft work program, and have a look at some of the specific programs. There are already a series of them here under interconnecting innovation ecosystems, that is regions or regional ecosystems, particularly in your region could be interesting. Scaling up, if you like, the potential of businesses to grow within that ecosystem, within the regional economy, including, you can see there a program specifically targeting women's tech startups, and of course partnerships on innovative SMEs across Europe. So again, there's already some elements which are already on the table which you can look at and to understand how this pillar 3 might provide an opportunity to you in the region. The other thing I wanted to say about the program, of course, is the element about low carbon, and the low carbon program, which will be part of pillar 2, will be quite interesting because it will provide finance, certainly finance for low carbon public authority initiatives, green taxation and things like this, which could be worthy of looking at, and developing partnerships with other groups of local authorities across the European Union under that pillar 2 low carbon program priority. So there are 2 essential elements of Horizon Europe, which I recommend further research. So far in Brussels, we're seeing a couple of things emerging so far. There's the so-called moonshot missions, or the missions for Horizon Europe, and also these European partnerships. These are replacing the joint undertakings, which is, if you like, you need to see this as the top-down element of research and innovation, where the the EU has a series of priorities it wants to achieve, and it wants to get the key players together, and it attaches some funds to that to drive that agenda rather than relying on the bottom-up project generation. So there is a top-down element to this, and here it is. There's a whole series of these European partnerships already forming, and as of I think this week, the European Commission announced a very significant amount of funding to get these European partnerships moving already. There's just a slide there showing the 10 partnership areas which have been announced, and 10 million euros already put on the table by the Horizon Europe programme to get those partnerships up and running. So the couple of interesting ones, number 4 and number 5 there, you see Circular Bio-Based Europe and the Clean Hydrogen could well be, certainly be partnerships which the North and West region might like to look at in more detail as they unfold. Again, with other programs, I've touched on Horizon Europe, but there's obviously the Erasmus Plus program. There's going to be additional funds for the European Maritime Fisheries Fund, which could be interesting in terms of the blue growth agenda, maritime agenda, renewables, and certainly the fisheries management issues, which could be interesting to look at as well. There's, as Theresa said earlier, identifying your networks to find out new information, identify those relationships, get that upstream intelligence about what's happening is readily available. And I've looked at 2 networks. I've looked at ERIN, the European Regions Innovation Network, and I've looked at EURADA as well, the European Regional Development Agency Network. And there's a number of things happening already. The Kayla data platform, which EURADA is pushing, is there trying to sign up, if you like, stakeholders interested in future collaboration so that they can get early intelligence on the trends, accelerate your innovation and find partners and collaborators. So it might be worth having a look at the Kayla initiative from EURADA. There's a brokerage event EURADA are running on the 25th of March, I've noticed. And certainly don't forget the European Research and Innovation Days this year, which are going to be a virtual event, of course, but certainly one worth putting into the diary there from the 23rd to the 24th of June. So just to wrap up on this area, there's going to be Next Generation EU is going to fire up quite a lot of the existing regional programs, shared management programs, but also these sectoral programs as well. And the opportunities for regions, companies and citizens will be there. And of course, understanding and working closely with the member state is going to be vital to secure the benefits of those programs. But other programs, of course, will be brought through to companies directly, for example, through EIB initiatives, the Solvency Support Instrument I mentioned, InvestEU, and things like this.
Susan, how are you? Just
hey, Theresa.
Give me 2 seconds.
How are you?
I'm okay, thanks. Just give me 2 seconds to blank this guy.
Can you hear me okay?
No.
Yeah, sorry, we had a slight interruption there, but you're fine again, Simon.
Okay, sorry, I just thought checking I was still here. So I'm going to move very quickly on to part 2 now, which is going to join up with what Theresa said earlier about maximising the regional impact from opportunities available. I think if we're looking at the competitive funds in the European Union, those from the Commission, those coming through the agencies, we could be talking about the LIFE programme, we could be talking about the Connecting Europe facility, we could be talking about the Blue Economy window call that happened recently. It's the same principle, and it's about good preparation. You need to think back from the deadline. You need to track back probably 5 or 6 months from the actual deadline so that you can start your consortia forming, so that you can do your preparation, collect inputs from partners, work out what the work packages are and the tasks that are going to go on to give those individual partners a real role. As Theresa said earlier on, that principle applies to this as it does to Interreg. It's exactly the same. Certainly prepare draft proposals in time and get them around the group. And of course, meeting and discussing and proposal completion. Most of these programs operate online portals where you upload online. So your organization needs to be registered with the Commission with relevant PIC codes, for example, PIC codes, so that you can use the Commission portals effectively, or the agency portals, to apply for the funding. There are more than 450 types of EU grants out there, and don't forget the loans. But certainly there are some good websites out there, as Theresa said, where you can gather that information. I often use this one, which is Welcome Europe, which provides a really regular flow of information about calls and things that are going on. It's not a Commission site, but it's a third-party site, but certainly it's very up to date, and it gives good information. So you can use a variety of sources to make sure that you're staying up to date with what's going on and what can fit your agenda. I've looked at some of the info day slides. For example, this is the life info day that took place on the life program recently that Theresa's just mentioned, and it was some advice around writing good projects. Some of the common problems, for example, that occur: insufficient background, why, who, and how in terms of the application. The rationale for the projects is not clear. Objectives too broad and too many, not enough focus. The partnership doesn't fit. A bit like Theresa said earlier, the partners don't all have a clearly defined role. Over optimistic or unrealistic qualification of the impacts, and replication confused with networking and dissemination. Vague plans to sustain project results and legacy after the project's over. These are some of the common problems which occur even with life projects, but again, it's very common, and it's cross-cutting with all projects. I'm actually in the process at the moment working with 5 people working on a Connecting Europe Facility Port project for the deadline in March. And I emphasize the fact there are 5 of us working on it together, and we've been working on it for a couple of months already. So if you are going for these funds, do it seriously, because it does need to be prepared properly. Will my proposal fit with the objectives of the call and the eligibility conditions? Who's going to be the lead applicant? Because that's obviously a burden that needs to be thought about. Is my action mature enough in terms of this type of funding? This is actually transport funding studies, but you have to prove that you're going to move towards an infrastructure building phase afterwards. So you need to make sure that the studies you're doing actually do have an end to them. Am I missing necessary information or authorizations that I might need? For example, on this program, you have to have a member state authorization to say your project's supported, or indeed that the local authority in which you're looking at doing this particular transport work is ready to work with you on the authorization and the environmental permitting dimension. Financial sources, match funding, cash flow, certainly activities and milestones being clearly defined are important for a successful project. So when it comes to writing a submission for one of those centrally managed funds, you need to think about things like the PIC code and the ECAS login. Make sure you've got your basics in place. You can do that anytime. You don't have to wait for the call. You can do that now, and make sure that your organization has all those things in place. Normally what goes on is you have a part A element to the application, which is administrative, and a part B, which is technical. The technical one, you need to be careful. You need to make sure you don't overdo the page. There may be a page limit to how much you can write. And of course, you will have to cover essentially in a research and innovation project, or even indeed one of the other funds, things like excellence, impact, and implementation, how you will deliver the actions. You need to look down the pipe and look at the award criteria at the end to make sure that you understand how the project's going to be scored. There are 2 elements to this. There's the weighting of the scoring across innovation, impact, and implementation, which is important. This is actually, I've taken this slide from the Blue Economy window call from the European Maritime Fisheries Fund. It has a step 2 to it, which is obviously about making sure your bid can show how an SME can upscale and grow to develop a new, larger market as a result of the investment you're seeking. But certainly the principle across the top is the same with many of the research and innovation funds. And what's important is the evaluation process. there's an external evaluation involving 3 people. So it's a process you can't lobby. It's independent. The experts are a balanced team. The experts are turned over fairly regularly and move to work with different groups of evaluators. They have to declare conflicts of interest. They have to be of different nationality, and there has to be at least one expert from the field in which the application is applying. So it's a very difficult process to actually engage with at this process. But what you can do is to understand exactly how this evaluation, external evaluation, will unfold. The individual evaluation will take place. Each evaluator will read the bid and will score it from their different perspectives. The consensus group will get together and they'll discuss with each other what they think. It will then go to a panel review with the Commission and the various departments, agencies, to put a final view on that. So they score the proposals again on the excellence chapter, on the impact chapter, and the implementation chapter. And of course, the criterion they'll look for, they'll give it an individual criteria, individual score for each of the chapters, but they'll then have an overall score, and that overall score will have to get a minimum of 12 out of 15 points for it to be passed on up into the scoring evaluation panel with the Commission. So essentially, after this external evaluation, the European Commission will make the final decisions. Information to applicants should be a maximum of 5 months after the call deadline. And then anybody that's successful will go into a grant agreement preparation in terms of delivering the funding and starting the project. So just a few thoughts from my side, David, about maximizing success with external funding. I really do echo what Theresa has said earlier. Consider investments you're already planning and don't chase grants. It's vital that you stick to the core priorities that you have and then see where they fit within the wider scheme of things. Work out very quickly what's being administered under shared management, i.e. via the region and particularly via the member state national departments, and those which are centrally administered, such as the sectorial programs I've mentioned from the Commission and the agencies. Have a business development mindset in your head when you're developing these projects. So, for example, like with the blue economy window, you've got a very clear idea as an SME what that market is for that renewable technology or that that innovation that you want to bring to the market. You've almost got to treat the European Commission as a little bit like the Dragon's Den, where you're actually going in to find investors rather than drafting a traditional application form. So that business development mindset can be helpful. And certainly with any grant, it's good to have a business development plan so that you don't fall foul of the cash flow problems that Theresa mentioned earlier. Certainly do the homework, work with those European Commission and national contact points. You can raise questions and queries to clarify issues that you don't understand in the text, and certainly work with others, build relationships, work with the Irish Region's European Office, but work again with some of these sectoral networks when it works for that particular project theme. Choose your partners wisely, because you want partners to contribute and you want partners to be active and you want partners to have experience. And certainly that make sure that budget allocation that is spread across that project reflects what those partners are doing in terms of their roles. As we always say in Brussels, plan ahead, try not to get in a twist, because it can be very painful if you're heading towards the midnight deadline for the European Union Commission portal shutting down, that you're still trying to upload PDFs and trying to get various documents in before the deadline. So again, go back to that arrow I showed where you plan 5 or 6 months ahead and you build your team and put the capacity in place to do this effectively. You essentially have to become an external funding expert. And of course, this environment is always changing. I've been at it for 25 years and I'm still learning. And I think there's always something new to learn. And I'm happy to certainly discuss that a little bit more later in questions. Thank you very much.
Great, Simon. Thank you very much. And Theresa earlier. Very informative, plenty of information there for our attendees to take on board. And as I said, we will be circulating the information and the recording will be available so people can come back to it if they wish. Could I just ask if in terms of any questions that people have, we've a few minutes before our next speaker. So if anybody has any questions, they might stick them into the chat box and we'll come to them. I have a question from Councillor Joe Sheridan in Galway. And I'm going to ask Joe if he can speak to it rather than me read it out because it sounds a bit complicated. Joe, can you speak to your question there?
Hello, David. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Simon, how are you doing from the west of Ireland? Thank you for your chat. Just would you, in your field of expertise in the marine estuary field, would you have any connections in small, micro, more river-based community networks, kind of renewables, Simon?
Yeah, actually, a few years ago, we worked with Donegal with a company from Brussels called Aquascrew that were doing river-based renewable energy, which could be an interesting example we could dig out again. Maybe we could leave that and come back to a separate conversation offline, see if we can link you up with one or more of those companies.
That'd be great, Simon. Thank you.
Okay, Joe, thank you. Thank you. A question from Patrick Devine, the NWRA. When applying for a project and you're a lead partner, is it worth including a budget for third-party management consultant to assist with the project management and administration, or is this an eligible expense across the programme?
I'll let Theresa answer the Interreg angle to that because there's an Interreg answer on that one, I think.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, Simon, apologies for the interruption. I didn't realise I was on mute and I was taking a call about something related to Brexit. But anyway, Patrick, interesting question. And I suppose it depends on the project and depends on the programme. In terms, I mean, in most cases, it is an eligible expenditure, but in evaluating the programme or in carrying out the evaluation or the assessment of the project, assessors will look very much at what's the role of the third-party consultant in the project. Are they doing some of the work or all of the work? And I mean, this is maybe not what Simon wants to hear as he is an external consultant, but I'm giving you sort of the very honest answer from both sides and from my experience. So how much is that costing within the project budget is a very important consideration. What is the role of the third-party consultant and why do they need to be involved? So I suppose it's a little bit like why any partner is involved. It's also my experience in dealing with Horizon 2020 projects in a university context is some academics who use third-party management consultants in their project hated it, and some people had a really good experience. And I suppose it depends on the context of the partner and the lead partner of the project, and how closely they're aligned to what the management consultant wants to do, or how closely the management consultant is aligned to the partners. So it's generally an allowed expenditure, but I would say you've got to have a very strong reason for doing it, and they've got to bring an expertise to the table that is not evident within the partnership. So it's weigh it up on a case-by-case basis.
My experience of obviously working on Interreg projects is obviously lead partners can allow for a so-called work package 0, which preparation phase, and that preparation phase has a pot allocated to it, but essentially the individual lead partner and its prospective partners, project partners, have to take the risk on that. So they take the risk on investing in that project preparation through their internal staff resources, and if they need to, go outside as well for some specific additional resource to help coordinate, or if you like, help relate it as closely as possible to the program's priorities. Now, it is a risk, but certainly once the project is approved, that work package 0 is paid, and certainly within Interreg, it's paid without any receipts because it's a lump sum. So this is a common thing across the Interreg programs, for example, in 2Cs, and certainly across the Channel program. But maybe Theresa can comment on the programs in your region.
Yeah, no, not sure it's a lump sum payment in any of the Interreg projects that Ireland would be involved in. It might have been an agreed thing in the 2Cs, but I'm not sure if that's how it is in the other programs. It certainly won't be in the cross-border programs that some of the attendees will have been used to.
Okay.
In terms of,
Yeah,
so
well, there's a nuance between some of the Interreg programs and how the joint secretariats draw this up, but there may be some margin for actually being aware of what other programs are doing around Europe, because that's quite an important thing as well at a regional level, understanding how other programs are being administered.
And just another point there that Ruth Lowers makes is that we shouldn't forget the public procurement issue for consultants. And I think you had mentioned there, Simon, in terms of having ducks in rows, the public procurement is a big part of all that. So there would be a public procurement depending on the budget, but obviously the services would be significant. That would probably cross that threshold that would require some element of public procurement. Just one other question too on finance, which many people ask when we do similar programs around EU funding, is around the VAT. And maybe Theresa or Simon, whoever, just in terms of that again, particularly, organizations that may not be registered for VAT, what are the implications there?
It's funny, I had quite a query about this last week from Brittany, because obviously when a project's submitted, you declare whether you're subject to VAT or not. And in our case, our partner is subject to VAT, so they reclaim it from the state. So as a result, they cannot claim it through the European program. What happens is interesting if, for example, you have procured subcontractors to you as a beneficiary, and they might not be subject to VAT, for example, if they're, for example, a voluntary organisation or something like that. Now, in that case, that was interesting, because in our case, the project would cover 100% of those costs, because that party was not reclaiming the VAT either. But essentially, as a beneficiary and a partner to a project, you declare up front when you apply whether you are covered by VAT or not. If you are covered by it, you can't reclaim it through the program.
Okay, and you mentioned there in terms of voluntary or community involvement too, and probably getting a little bit at a lower level in terms of projects, but where a project receives services in kind, whether that be through voluntary or community input, or whether people with professional services are lending them to the project, how is that counted for, or is there any benefit to that type of involvement?
Well, again, going back to what Theresa said earlier, you've got to be a little bit careful about each program has its own rules. And I think with the programs that we're involved in, there is a mechanism for recognizing contributions in kind. So, for example, if someone gives you the village hall or gives you meeting room facilities and stuff like that, there is a written declaration of what that value is, the equivalent value is. But again, I'm not sure what the programs in which Theresa is involved in.
It varies across the board, and it's kind of one of those areas. It's, Simon said, it's one of those areas that's a little bit dependent on who the program secretariat is and who who's managing the program. Generally, though, a third-party contribution will, only if it's able to be verified and given an actual market rate, will it be normally accepted as an actual contribution. Quite often in my experience, what I've seen is that people applicants will add it into the application, not as a form of a match funding or anything like that, but as a commitment from the partner that they're fully committed to the project. So for example, in terms of university applications that I would have been involved in, adding in the a PhD from the university at the university's own cost would be seen as a huge commitment from the university to the project. So it very much depends on the programme. It wouldn't necessarily be overly used, I think, in the European Territorial Cooperation programmes, but maybe Brendan would have more information on that. But yeah, it's dependent on the programme.
Okay, and in terms of what you were both talking about in terms of partner searches, I think this is particularly key, particularly in terms of the European funding side, in terms of making those partners and finding them. Again, maybe some organizations, it might be their first step into European funding. They don't have an easy network in which they can access. As you said, I think, Simon, you know, being a lead on a project is also very demanding, and I wouldn't recommend it, I'm sure you wouldn't either, that anybody get involved as a lead first off. That is about building up to that capacity. But for those who may be interested in this whole area and making those first steps and building some element of partnership at a fairly basic level, what sort of tips or advice would you give?
Well, I suppose use existing contacts would be the tips I would use. So, for example, you might say that's kind of chicken and egg, but your existing contacts, i.e., the Regional Assembly. So, the Northwest Regional Assembly is a partner and is a fully fledged partner in the Conference of Peripheral and Maritime Regions. So, that is a partnership, or that's a network across Europe that provides very good information and advice. And, you know, so if you're sitting in a smaller organization or a local authority within the Northwest region area, you might say, well, okay, how am I going to get those? Contact the Northwest Regional Assembly, who then have those links also via ourselves in the Irish Region's European Office. I know some, and I think there's Donegal County Council, from memory, it could also be a member of the CPMR. There are networks that people are connected into. Use those as a starting point, and then use us as based in Brussels, being able to support you to find those people. The other thing, I suppose, it's just, you know, given we're in COVID times and we're not out and about as much as we'd want to be, obviously, and meeting other people, you know, as you'll know, David and Simon, obviously, that, you know, Brussels is full of people that are interested in building partnerships and working together. So it's about just making that first step. So think who's the closest contact you have that has a view to other partners across Europe. It may be you're involved in some other networks, you know, as a smaller organization. Ask those people, are they interested in partnering on some of the programs you might be thinking of?
David, just a quick point. It might be worth mentioning CPMR is lobbying very actively at the moment to get that Brexit adjustment reserve, because that was part of that Pillar 1, to try and get that down to the ground, because obviously the customs authorities and others are reimbursing quite a lot of their costs, or planning to reimburse quite a lot of their costs from it. But certainly in France, I'm aware of it, and in Belgium, there's a real push to try and get that Brexit adjustment reserve down to the grassroots level. But so that's a bit we've not mentioned this morning.
We haven't mentioned it. That was my phone call, Simon. We're on the case. We're fully on the case on behalf of the Irish members of the Committee of the Regions. Yeah, but it's, I mean, I think Ireland PLC wants that fund agreed ASAP and on the ground ASAP. So yeah, it's going through the Committee of the Regions over the next couple of weeks. And I know maybe Colin or Maria will have some thoughts of that in terms of the Parliament. Yeah, we didn't mention it actually. It is it's sort of going hand in hand with the recovery and resilience plan for Ireland. The Brexit Adjustment Reserve is €5 billion, and 1 billion of that is currently allocated to Ireland for the consequences of Brexit. But we know there are other colleagues in other member states making active plays for the methodology to be more favourable to other regions.
Okay, look, I'm going to leave this session at that because we have our next speaker. But thank you both, Simon, and thank you, Theresa, for your excellent presentations. Delighted to involve you this morning, and to also for joining us during the week as well, and keeping an eye on proceedings and contributing so well this morning. And as I said, the presentations will be circulated next week to everybody. So thank you both very much. If I could move on to our next speaker who has joined us, who is Andreas Griffroy. Andreas has been a member of the Flemish Parliament since May 2014, and since September 2019 he has been a permanent member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and since January 2020 he is also a member of the European Committee of the Regions. At the CEOR he serves on the Commission for Economic Policy and the Commission for Environment, Climate Change and Energy. In recent years, Andreas has focused on issues such as energy, climate, entrepreneurship and innovation, research and development, and policy on intermunicipal cooperation. He graduated as an industrial engineer and marketing at Group T here in Leuven. He then worked for a consultancy firm in the energy sector for 5 years. In 1994, Andreas started his own company, which he sold at the end of 2014 to devote himself fully to his work in the Flemish Parliament. Andreas has been addicted to music since his youth, and during his studies here in Leuven, he was a flautist and a member of the University Symphony Orchestra. So we hope to have you too at the Irish College, maybe performing sometime too, Andreas. In his free time, he enjoys playing hockey and discovering the beautiful that is East Flanders on his racing bike. So thank you very much, Andreas, for joining us this morning, and I'm going to give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, and also thank you to the organization to be a little bit flexible, because I had this morning some issues about my agenda. If it's good, I think I can share my PowerPoint. I will check. Yes. Okay. So good morning, everyone. And I think I have to go back because it is okay. The COVID-19 crisis has proven the vulnerability of our societies and economies to emergencies and natural disasters. At the same time, it's bringing huge economic and social costs, which will have to be duly assessed when setting out the right policy framework to enable the transformation of our economy. When preparing the post-pandemic response, the European Union has decided to root its recovery and resilience on a sustainable and climate-neutral path via its flagship Green Deal. By putting at the center the do no harm principle, by earmarking 30% of new investments for climate-related expenditure, and by making the Green Deal a job-creating engine. The German presidency has led a key semester for the adoption of this unprecedented package, and the combination of the next generation EU and multi-annual financial framework will help transform the EU through its major policies. And they consulted also the European Committee of the Regions for this opinion, for which I was the rapporteur, but later on I will tell you more about this opinion. First of all, how the Green Deal can guide sustainable recovery. The post-pandemic crisis requires ambitious stimulus packages to support sustainable economic growth, job creating while alleviating poverty in our regions, cities and villages. The Green Deal could be instrumental to achieve these fundamental goals as long as it promotes a balanced and targeted approach which takes into account the economic and social situation in the regions and prioritizes sectors with more job creation potential while minimizing the costs. Regarding Green Deal policies, some key actions will have to be prioritized, targeted in the recovery. And I list 6 of them. It can, for example, include it in a uniform scoreboard concerning the regional Green Deals. The first one is about energy efficiency in the construction sector, which needs to be boosted via green buildings and green infrastructures. There is an investment gap of 185 billion euros per year, and the potential of creating or retaining is 4 million jobs. Launching a renovation wave will trigger public and private investments that Europe's local and regional authorities can direct in an efficient way. Second, green mobility and transport. More investments in sustainable infrastructure like filling and charging stations for alternative fuels and zero-emission vehicles along the EU transport network have to be supported. 3, the circular economy. The circular economy will have to be boosted through predictable legislative and financial frameworks that include public and private funding, with a focus on research of innovative low emissions technologies to give way to circular and carbon neutral industry. 4, the energy transition needs to speed up its tempo, both enhancing the use of renewables and the availability of clean energy sources, supporting the deployment of clean hydrogen and accelerating energy system integration and sector coupling will be fundamental. 5, halting biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation will have to be prioritized through a massive investment in nature-based infrastructures, in greening cities, for example, and reconsidering territorial management and nature protection strategies. And 6, a resilient food chain and the management of the rural territory should be supported on all levels. The territorial implementation of the farm to fork strategy should complement the above mentioned orientation. On top of these specific actions, some systemic actions will have to be put in place to ensure an effective mainstreaming of Green Deal objective already in the recovery phase, such as enforcing gradually green public procurement practices, moving towards circular procurement, but also speed up the reduction of carbon emission from the industry through predictable legislative and financial frameworks, but also approve a clear framework for green and brown taxonomies, apply systematically the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, framework and the governance of the European semester. But also establish a set of indicators at subnational level to monitor the achievements in the field of the Green Deal and in accordance to the Sustainable Development Goals at the local level, building upon the idea of a European Climate Neutrality Observatory. And at least reassess the funding strategies for climate and energy action, granting access to all relevant actors, and reinforcing the capacities to access these funds. The next question is then how local and regional authorities can successfully implement a Green Deal. A top-down approach would make the Green Deal fail. Recovery and resilience plans will have to be able to respond to the specific needs of territories to ensure the effectiveness, and to local and regional authorities must have a greater say in their definition, in line, of course, with the principle of the subsidiarity. The relevance of the local and regional authorities in this complex context is recognized at all levels. Nevertheless, it is seldom reflected and practiced in the governance and funding mechanism. So, which governance is needed then to make the Green Deal going local? The question is, which governance improvements are needed to ensure that the Green Deal recovery from the pandemic is in line with the EU climate neutrality goals? And to explore this topic, I have identified some key questions on the 3 different levels. First of all, we are talking about the governance at the European level. So, which are then the key questions on the European level? First is, how can the European Union set up a set of indicators at subnational level, such as a European regional scoreboard on the Green Deal, to measure progress in terms of legislation, policies and financing at regional level? Which are the key actions to implement to ensure an effective mainstreaming of the Green Deal into all EU policies? Do we need a more precise Green Deal assessment grid for screening the recovery and resilience plans? Which other actions the European Commission could envisage to kickstart the Green Deal plans at regional level? In view of future funding of the implementation projects within the multi-annual financial framework and next generation, the EU would meantime an immediate pilot action to finance feasibility projects help to kickstart the project pipeline. And these are the questions at the European level. And then we have the governance at questions at the national level, which are there then the key questions. How should be multi-level governance mechanism on the basis of the Code of Conduct on Partnership and multi-level governance for cohesion policy be reinforced to ensure that cities and regions have their say on the national plans for recovery and resilience? And second, how can the European exchange of best practices from local and regional authorities be further boosted to inspire the green recovery and national resilience plans? And then we are talking about the third level, which is then, of course, the regional and local level. There we have also some key questions. Will the model of regional green deals and urban green deals help to steer the green transition? And secondly, how can the Covenant of Mayors support the scale down of the Green Deal at the regional and local level? To conclude for this point, in terms of governance, it's crucial that first, local and regional authorities are involved at the decision makers table whenever decisions concern specific territories. Two, they are consulted when setting up the general rules for the EU recovery and resilience strategy. And three, funding schemes must be put in place to grant direct access to funds to cities and regions for the implementation of their Green Deal projects. To be successful, the efforts associated with achieving EU climate neutrality in 2050 must be divided among the various member states based on three principles, but always in respect of the principle of the subsidiarity. The first is each member state and each local and regional authorities should in the first instance consider for itself to what extent it can contribute to the objective of European climate neutrality 2050 and communicate its contribution to the European Commission. We call that the bottom-up approach. Two, the European Commission must then examine the extent to which the aggregate level of ambition of the national contribution meets the European objective. In the event of an ambition gap, the additional effort required must be shared cost-effectively between the member states. And three, moreover, it must be possible to make use of international flexibility. Member states that make an effort that exceeds their cost-effective contribution must be given priority access to this mechanism. The Green Deal is going local, and as you know, more than 70% of climate change mitigation and up to 90% of the climate change adaptation measures are undertaken by local and regional authorities. And they are responsible for more than 65% of climate and environment-related public investment. The myriad of existing initiatives at local level tell us that regions and cities will be at the forefront of the green recovery. Several of them have adopted local green deals or energy transition plans and integrated the sustainable development goals in their long-term strategies. The Green Deal going local is a European partnership between local authorities, local economy stakeholders and citizens to establish and implement local green deals for sustainability of the local economy. It's an opportunity to scale up local action to deliver the European Green Deal, and it's an opportunity to promote success stories from European cities and inspire others to follow by best practices, lessons learned, networking. Thanks to the implementation of local green deals, we can build on common foundations of sustainability, equity, inclusiveness, and just transition. But we can also include community organizing and engagement of citizens, local authorities, and communication and outreach. But also contribute to the overarching objective of the European Green Deal to transform the European Union's economy for a sustainable and resilient future. We can also include a mix of long-term targets to address the scale of climate, environmental, and growth issues. We can also facilitate mutual learning through collaborations. Furthermore, many regions and local authorities have adopted energy transition or local resilient plans. However, Their actions are seldom acknowledged nor measured and valued, and they are eventually lost in the wider national picture. In addition, several monetary systems already exist, but they are not sufficiently coordinated with each other. It's therefore important to make full use of existing mechanisms and to continue to work with the bottom-up principle when evaluating and monitoring and evaluating the monitoring. How is the Green Deal implemented in Flanders? The Flemish economy, too, is suffering heavily from the corona crisis, but at the same time, it offers an excellent opportunity to carry out some reforms and prepare our economy for the future. And that's why the Flemish government has drawn up a recovery plan that focuses on sustainability and decarbonization of our economy and society. There will be a large-scale program to accelerate the sustainable renovation of homes and other buildings. There will also be investments in CO2 capture and reuse. The ambition is to make Flanders a hydrogen top region. Sustainable traffic modes and infrastructure for charging stations for electric cars will also be promoted. More than ever, Flanders will become a recycling hub, an example of circular economy. I will briefly touch upon some of the measures Flanders will take. If we talk about increased renovation activity of buildings, we have now a large-scale program of energy renovation of private housing by providing a labor premium and an interest-free renovation loan in order to entice as many new owners as possible to carry out thorough energy renovation of their home. Regarding the investments in sustainability of transport and modal shift, we will increase investments in all sustainable modes of transport. We will accelerating the rollout of charging station infrastructure for electrical cars and investing in LED lighting along regional and local roads. Concerning increasing investment in renewable energy, both for solar panels, small and medium-sized wind turbines, and for heat networks, we're giving priority to the most cost-efficient projects. Concerning accelerated transition to a maximal circular economy, we try to develop Flanders as a recycling hub. We support for companies for research projects aimed at the design to recycle, and we support for innovation in the building sector aimed at the circular construction. And at least research and guidance for companies making the transition to the circular economy. Then about this draft opinion, which I was talking in the beginning, and the draft opinion was has the title as "The Impact of Climate Change on Regions: An Assessment of the European Green Deal." And this opinion, adopted by the Committee of the Regions, will make recommendations to the German presidency in the areas of governance, funding, and monitoring mechanism. I was a rapporteur, and in my opinion, in order to be successful, the Green Deal must support an approach that is around 3 words: balanced, targeted, and most importantly, of course, once again, bottom up. If we start with bottom up, as I told you, now more than 70% of climate change mitigation, up to 90% of climate change adaptation measures are undertaken by local and regional authorities, and they are responsible for more than 65% of climate and environmental related public investments. The merit of existing initiatives at local level tell us that regions and cities will be at the forefront of the green recovery. And several of them have adopted local green deals or energy transition plans and integrated sustainable development goals in their long-term strategies. However, their input and contributions are seldom reflected in national plans drawn up in the EU capitals. And local and regional authorities should be able to participate in a structured manner in the design and implementation of national plans related to the Green Deal, including the recovery and the resilience plans, and in accordance with the bottom-up approach and partnership principle. To address this issue, we propose mandatory consultations, multi-level dialogues extended to all areas of the Green Deal. The EU Long-Term Budget and Recovery Fund will play an important role in supporting the objective of climate neutrality, as a big share of the resources will be allocated for sustainable investments. However, the centralized management is a serious matter of concern. More opportunities should be created for cities and regions to get easier and more direct access to funding. And more could be done with the European Investment Bank to raise awareness among local regional authorities about the technical assistance programs. This will be crucial for the success and uptake of key initiatives such as the renovation wave, the implementation of circular economy plans. The second word is targeted. This is also a key success factor, is a targeted approach. All the themes that the EU Green Deal encompasses, like renovation of buildings, sustainable mobility, clean air, circular economy, digital transition, sustainable farming, just to name a few, provide fertile ground for cost-effective integration of new and existing plans across sectors. The Green Deal must prioritize sectors with more job-creating potential and focus on measures that allow for greater carbon emission reductions at lower costs, while taking into account local circumstances and different energy mixes. But involving local and regional authorities more in the decision-making process is not sufficient to guarantee a successful implementation. And the third word, which is a key factor, is balanced. The Green Deal has to be balanced and to take due account of the various economic and social situations in the regions and cities, as well as the asymmetric impact of the pandemic. This implies adopting a flexible approach, considering the contribution each region or country can afford, and rewarding those who do more in order to bridge emission gaps. A one-size-fits-all policy will simply not work. Once implemented, the Green Deal must be monitored. Pledges and commitments of our regions and cities need to be substantiated with accountable figures. And when actions are not measured, they are not valued. When they are not valued, they are overlooked. Several monitoring systems already exist, but they are not sufficiently coordinated with each other. Therefore, we propose to work with the Commission to develop a regional European scoreboard to monitor progress on climate and Green Deal related legislation, policies and financing at regional level. And such indicators could provide evidence of the progress in the implementation of the recovery plans locally, and could also serve as a knowledge tool to help represent the diversity of territories' needs and identify and replicate best practices. To conclude, first of all, I want to tell you the example not from Flanders, but from Sevilla. Sevilla is a big town in Spain, south of Spain, and there are 2 million inhabitants. So it's a quite big city, it's bigger than Brussels. And the mayor of Sevilla, which is also the chairman of the NV committee and the Committee of the Regions, told us in a session what was his problem. He has a lot of old buildings. He likes to do something about these old buildings, a renovation wave, to make these buildings more energy efficient. So he had a lot of projects, but he didn't have the cash, or he didn't have the funding. So he knows that Europe is coming up with this kind of funding, but he knows also that he has to bring his report and his request to the National Parliament in Madrid. And then the National Parliament in Madrid is gathering all the different, let us say, requests from the different regions and cities, make then one report on that, and bring this report to the European Union. And then the European Union can say, okay, we have that kind of funding, that kind of money, and this money is going back to Madrid, and then Madrid has to split up this budget between the different cities and regions who requested something. The problem is only that Sevilla was not involved when Madrid was making its global report. And Sevilla was also not involved when Madrid was receiving the money and they have to split it up, this funding to the different regions and cities. And I think that's a gap. And you can say, is that a problem of the European Union or is that a national problem? Well, we can discuss about that, because I think it's a problem of the two. It's a problem of the governance in that country, but maybe it's also a problem of the governance, how European Union is working. And I find that a very good example. And I cannot say that in Belgium is organized on the same way. In Belgium, we have also our own problems. But for me, it was an example that what we are always claiming in Flanders, that we don't have access to the direct funding of the European Union, that I saw now that also other countries, regions and cities has the same problem. So it's an issue which covers, in fact, all the regions and cities in Europe. So to conclude, to be successful, the efforts associated with achieving European Union climate neutrality in 2050 must be divided among the various member states based on 3 principles, but of course, in respect of the subsidiarity. The 3 principles for us are bottom-up approach, the additional effort must be shared cost-effectively between member states, and allowance of international flexibility. And in terms of governance, this means that local and regional authorities are involved at the decision makers table. Local and regional authorities are consulted when setting up the general rules for the climate strategy, and grant direct access to funds to cities and regions for the implementation of their Green Deal projects. And for that reason, the Green Deal must support an approach which is balanced, targeted, and most of all, bottom-up. I thank you very much.
Great, Andreas. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing the experiences of Flanders and your own experience in this area. And again, I'd ask if anybody has any questions, if they can pop them into the chat box or the Q&A box, and I can ask Andreas to respond to them. Just a couple of points, Andreas, if I can, just to start off, and certainly listening to your presentation, there's a bit of a trend through it in terms of subsidiarity, bottom up, and the Green Deal's nobody left behind. And I think these 3 points are well connected and are particularly relevant too for the northern and western region of Ireland as well, that we don't want to be left behind. We want to have greater input from the bottom up, and we have many online who represent that civil society. But at the same time, we want input into the policy. And you mentioned too that there needs to be a greater role for regional and local authorities, more than just inputting into policy. And you're suggesting possibly the scoreboard would be a very good role, I think, for regional governments to do. Just in terms of that scoreboard and sort of how that might work at a regional level, where, as you said, you have the challenges of the member state who obviously like to take control of these issues too. How would you see regional and local governments playing a role within that scoreboard?
My answer is, I will answer in 2 things. First of all, the bottom-up approach. I had already discussions with Frans Timmermans, which is the commissioner for the Green Deal. And he said to me, yes, but it is bottom-up approach what we are doing with the Green Deal. We are making the rules and you just have to implement it. So the implementation is bottom-up. And then I said to him, oh, wait a moment. If for you the bottom-up approach is only the implementation, that's not enough for us. We want also to be for making the rules and the framework. Yeah? That's then the bottom-up. And then I come to the regional scoreboard. Of course, he said, but how can I compare then the different regions or the different cities? And of course, there he has a point, because I see it the same in Flanders, for example, that all the cities who have signed, for example, the Covenant of Mayors, then they have their own system of scoreboards. And then afterwards, when you have to compare that within Flanders, the different cities, this is a huge work. So what I then suggested to Frans Timmermans, and that's also what I'm suggesting here, is that he has to sit together with the regions, or let us say he can do that with the Committee of the Regions, because we are representing regions and cities, yeah? Sitting together to make a framework for a regional scoreboard. A framework, this means that you make your frame, yeah? And that then the regions can use to put in the data, etc., etc. What is the follow-up of this regional scoreboard is that each region, for me, that's the discussion of the subsidiarity, of course. Each region has to be free then to put its own targets if it fits in the European targets. And for one region, it can a little bit more, for other regions, it can a little bit less, and not on a state level. Because you have, even in countries like Spain, you have a huge difference, for example, with the north of Spain and with the south of Spain. You have the same issue in Italy. There's a huge discussion between North Italy and South Italy, because there, for example, more agriculture in the south, and in the north there's more industry, etc., etc., etc. So you see that there is a lot of difference within a country, and then the country cannot be ambitious enough because he feels that his regions is not following them. So give them these regions the possibility, with let us say a framework made by the European Union together with an authority like the local, like the Committee of the Regions, to produce a certain framework. When you have then a regional scoreboard, and then each region or each city can say, okay, we use the same framework so that it's comparable afterwards, so we can add it also afterwards, etc. So that, I think, is the really big outcourage that we have to do the next years.
And in terms, we were listening there earlier before you joined around European territorial cooperation, and Flanders is uniquely positioned with neighbours beside it. And we were talking too earlier in the week around biodiversity and how that transcends the borders. So in terms of the experiences in Flanders with the neighbours in the Netherlands, with Germany, France, possibly Luxembourg, well, not so much, but with France, Germany, and the Netherlands. There's the great Maas Rhine region, you know, which Flanders plays a very important part of, taking in Maastricht and Aachen in the Netherlands and so on. From your own experience in Flanders, how does that cross-border element work in terms of trying to coordinate on a wider regional basis the type of the Green Deal policies?
At the moment, not, because you have the fixed border of a country. The European Union is looking and is talking with the country, and is not talking with the region. And what you were saying is exactly, when we look, for example, to Flanders, and if we look what is the high industrialized region around us, this is, of course, a part of Germany, and then the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Flanders. And then it will be more logical that we can work together. But as European Union, and I can also understand, because it's the European Union is made, or is made like this, is looking to a country, and then you have suddenly, if you have a cross-border cooperation, suddenly there is a fixed border between the Netherlands and Flanders, and then you have to bring your fridges back to. We have to give our fridges back to Brussels, the Netherlands to Den Haag, of course. So the cooperation, which is for me very sensible. Very useful. This makes sense, but in fact, it's limited because of that. The European Union is not looking to regions, but is looking to countries, and this is a base philosophy which we have to change, because it's more logical. And I can understand also maybe another part of Europe that regions can work sometimes better together than countries can work together.
Yeah, and I think that's the importance of today, is that we're looking at it from a regional perspective and trying to see how regions can implement rather than relying on the member states, and trying exactly say that bottom up, that greater subsidiarity that brings the decisions down in both directions as well, and also greater accountability and performance management at local level, which is important too. Just one last question. You mentioned some of the key areas that Flanders were looking at, so trying to be the recycling centre around the circular economy, and we had somebody from Circular Flandern speak to us on Wednesday to that subject around renewables. And looking at the areas that, you know, are most cost efficient, and in Flanders there are options there, particularly around the coast or around the solar, or around other alternatives. And also you mentioned too around the energy ratings of buildings, and this is something I think that we are going to have to face very soon. And again, one of the presenters on Tuesday or on Wednesday was making the point that the new certificates that are coming out, the rising of the standards that are going to be expected over the next 12 years for public buildings and probably ultimately domestic buildings, is going to require a lot of investment. And a lot of initiative and a lot of will too, both politically and from civil society, to make that happen. But of those three areas, there's a lot going on to be done in the next 12 years, 10 to 12 years, particularly as we look to the 2030 targets, let alone the 2050 targets. And where do you think Flanders' priority will be in the next 3 to 5 years anyway?
Next 3 to 5 years, priority 2, circular economy and renovation. And for me, that's also, as an engineer, for me is also logical. Why? If you look to the trias energetica, the first thing that you have to do is to do it with less materials and less energy. This is renovation, this is energy efficiency, this is circular economy. And afterwards, we can look if I have built something with the recuperation of materials, etc. What is the advantage? Is, of course, that you're less dependent from outside, for example, Europe. If you look to Belgium, as a whole, or if you look to Flanders, it's the same. We have no our own energy production except wind and solar. For the rest, we have to import everything. We have to import everything what we reproduce. So if you're looking more circular, and if you look more to energy efficiency, this is for me the base before you can step up and to think about how I can produce, for example, my energy, etc. So for me, and that is also what they have in the past, they did not so well in the Flemish government. I say it honestly, they spent 30 billion euros for renewable and only 1 billion for renovation. And this has to be just in the opposite way. The first thing that you have to do is how you can renovate your buildings, how you can make your buildings more efficient, etc., etc. And on efficient way is even like that our homes are less efficient than the average in Europe. And we are a rich country, we are a rich region. Yeah? So this is not normal. Yeah? And that's because we have no focus on that. So we have to really focus on renovation, 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 and at the same time also on the circular economy. Because when you work on renovation of buildings, then you have also sometimes, for example, things that you have to break down. What will you do with these things which has break down? Or maybe I can put it to a different industry where you can reuse these materials for rebuilding, for example, other buildings. That's, for example, what they have done now with the new buildings that they will building for the Flemish government. And I think 30 or 35% of the using materials are reused materials. And this is an advantage on all levels. And I think this is also a part of the Green Deal. So renovation and circular economy.
Okay, well, look, thank you, Andreas. I'm going to call this session to an end, but I'm going to give a plug for Flanders as we leave, because based in Leuven at the Irish College, we see every day the great work that is being done in Flanders in these areas. As you know, Leuven is the capital of innovation for 2020. We have a great organization in Leuven 2030, which is about trying to make the city carbon neutral. We have Flanders Make just up the road from us, who are looking at those areas around the circular economy and trying to find alternative ways of having new products and materials that we can implement. So I would say to those who are interested in this area in terms of partnerships that we spoke about earlier with Simon and Theresa, Flanders is the key place to be. And there is plenty of content and plenty of contacts that we can develop greater partnerships between Flanders and the Northern Western region. But Andreas, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate taking time out of your busy day, and we're very grateful for your presentation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.
I'm going to introduce our next two speakers, our presenters and contributors, all in one, our two MEPs for the region. Just by way of introduction and formality, I'll just introduce Colm replaced Mairead McGuinness as MEP on her appointment to the Commission in 2020. A farmer and businessman by background, Colm sits on the European Parliament's Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development. He serves as a member of the Transport and Tourism Committee and a substitute member on the Fisheries Committee. Colm was a former national president of Macra na Ferma and runs his family farm in Tocher, County Louth. He was first elected to Louth County Council in 2009 for the Mid-Louth area, and he was chairman of Louth Partnership and Cohesion of Louth County Council from 2017 to 2018. Maria Walsh was born in Boston, but lived in the village of Shrewell in County Mayo in home territory, and graduated from Griffith College Dublin with a BA in journalism and visual media in 2009, and went on to a career in television production and creative management. In 2014, she was crowned the International Rose of Tralee at the festival of the same name that we're all familiar with. And up until July 2019, Maria served as a member of the Irish Reserve Defence Force at the 1st Armoured Cavalry Squadron based in Corrigg, County Kildare. Maria has been an active advocate and campaigner for diversity and social inclusion for many years. Maria was elected as a member of the European Parliament for the constituency of Midlands Northwest in the 2019 European Parliament elections. She's a full member of the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs and a substitute member on the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. Maria is a member of the Irish EPP representative on the Delegation for Relations with the United States and for the African, Caribbean and Pacific group of states. In the Employment Committee, she focuses on youth employment and entrepreneurship, fostering an inclusive labour market and promoting the mobility of workers. One of her priorities is mental health policy, particularly as it affects people's social and working lives. In the Civil Liberties Committee, she works on protecting civil rights for those in and beyond Europe, particularly in the area of migration. An activist in the LGBTQI+ rights in Ireland, she has carried out this advocacy over to her work on civil rights. So with the formalities done, I'd like to welcome you both, Colm and Maria, and thank you again for your time this morning and for joining us now at the end of our 3 days of fairly intense information around the Green Deal, its implications, its opportunities, and the funding opportunities that exist for the organisations that have joined us from the Northern and Western region. Maria, maybe I'll give you the opportunity, maybe just to give if I haven't stolen your thunder, give a bit of an introduction and maybe your views on the Green Deal and that for the region, and then maybe I'll come to Colm and we'll do the same.
Absolutely, and thanks very much, and what an introduction and welcome. You could have finished off in True County Mayo at the top end, and I would have found that sufficient. So I'm only delighted to be here, and I'm delighted my colleague and I are able to listen and learn, and really look forward to a fruitful conversation. And no doubt, we'll hopefully continue this engagement long after today's session. But with that story short, just give a little bit of intro into my thoughts on the Green Deal and where we stand from a committee perspective. So I sit on, as you shared, the Employment and Social Affairs Committee, as well as the Liberties, Home Affairs and Justice. But in particular, just honing in on the Committee for Employment and Social Affairs. There's some amazing stuff going on through that around with focus to the just transition mechanism and looking at how do we help citizens, particularly those in SMEs, those in who are in jobs, who are in positions like the guests today, to continue to bring people along in this journey. It's a radical project to make EU climate neutral by 2050, and for me, it covers not just what you would imagine on a piece of paper. You know, Green Deal looks at, agri, and I know Colm will focus on that, but it covers a lot more breadth into that, and no doubt all attendees today can agree. For me, politically, I think the fight will be over which countries shoulder the most burden. What we hear and see within the European Parliament, it would be poor Central European countries will say that the transition is quite expensive and disruptive for them. And they will argue, I'd imagine, that richer countries, less carbon intensive economies should do more. In some ways, yes, and in other ways, if we are going to take this radical project that is the Green Deal and become climate neutral by 2050, then it is the case we need to move and work together. As I said, I know Colm will focus on his own committee in Agri, a really interesting space and huge opportunities. But for me, in conjunction with his work on Agri, there's also some other wins, I believe, within the employment side of how we look and breathe within the Green Deal. And take just from the previous speaker, if you're looking at a household in 2050, we will have completely transformed set of ways that we cook, heat our home, interact with other human beings through digitization, move around, and the jobs we do. And that's why I say it impacts and has a direct relation to my committee work on employment and social affairs. There's no quick fix. How we bring people from A to B will be robust and radical, as I said from the outset, but it is doable. Now, no doubt many of the questions here will be, but where does the pot of money to pay for all this come from? Just digging deep into, again, the Employment and Social Affairs Committee and how that works. A couple of things I see is, a big one is around the Just Transition Mechanism. A couple of 3 areas within that, the Just Transition Fund will provide predominantly provide grants, and within that pot it's about 40 billion. Another dedicated scheme under the Invest EU programme, which looks at private investments, and the third being the public sector loan facility provided by the European Investment Bank, EIB. Now, I say all of that because I know probably a couple of questions coming from the floor will be around investments and funding, and no doubt that will come up. So I'll pause that and anticipate questions, if not now, perhaps in follow-up. But ultimately, it depends on how aggressive we want to be. I think one key program, and one that I would love to just share with others if they haven't heard, is how do we connect what everybody's doing to the people living in communities. One really cool project that I came across in prep of this was called GROOF, and it looked a partially funded EU program. I think the grant was about 2.9 million, and it was looking at 4 rooftop greenhouses in 4 countries: Luxembourg, Belgium, France, and Germany. And together through this project that, as I said, was partially EU funded, would save about 54 tons of CO2 emissions a year. Now that's a very urban project, but that's the type of radical change and radical programs that I think Northwest Regional Assembly and ourselves in the Parliament can start floating out to SMEs, apprenticeships, traineeships, and essentially in communities that we live in and learn and represent, and connecting this big lofty goal of the Green Deal into a very minute, digestible piece of forward planning. I went around the houses there, David, so apologies. I'll scale back.
We'll come back. Don't worry, you'll land. Don't worry.
We'll scale back, but ultimately, you know, these conversations happen where we all come in and learn and talk about what is possible and what's plausible. And yeah, and I'm looking forward to learning and hearing more. We have a close relationship with you all in the Northwest Regional Assembly, and may that long continue.
Great, thank you, Maria. Colm, you're very welcome as well, and thank you for joining us, not just for the hour, but for listening in earlier and earlier again as well during the week. So thanks very much. So maybe if you just want to follow on there from Maria in terms of your own perspective on the Green Deal and the work on the committees and the parliamentary work that you're doing.
Yes, look, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I was delighted I tuned in earlier actually, because there were some great presentations earlier this morning. Particularly, I suppose Theresa and Simon were very interesting. I thought, I suppose in a lot of ways they focused on where the funding opportunities are, and I think there's no point in us trying to in any way rehash that. I suppose one of the things Theresa said, she was trading on being new. Well, I'm still trading on being new. I'm only in the Parliament a couple of months, but no, I suppose what I'm not new to, I suppose, though, is the whole area of rural development. And like it is, like I did do 4 years as chair of a leader company, and then 4 years as in the LCDC in Louth. So I suppose this whole space of rural and community development is very close to my heart. I spent the last 6 years as chairman of a football club. I was president of Mockran Firm a number of years ago, and really it is at the heart of the interest I would have in sort of the region. As I suppose I'm on the Agriculture Committee, as everyone would say, but that committee is actually the Agriculture and Rural Development Committee. And I think that's a key important part of all this. And I suppose, look, I'm not going to maybe talk too much about, let's say, funding schemes of that. But the one thing I do want to do is, I suppose, a little bit of context of where I'm coming out from. I suppose with 11 years in the council, having been involved in developing LECPs and leader strategies, and working with companies to access funding over the years. Just a little bit of insight, I suppose, my own end, and then maybe to throw out a question or two of my own, more or less, in terms of just to get a conversation going. Firstly, I just want to say around the whole couple of things, observations I'd have over the years in terms of capacity building, we'll say, that I think some of these things were mentioned earlier, but I think they're very important. Accessing expertise and knowledge and researching into the different programs that are there, particularly in identifying partners in the like of industry and maybe universities, but equally within communities, working with your county council, making all those connections. That's the type of background work people need to be doing in advance of programs. And sometimes people focus on what's wrote in a program, maybe at European level. Whatever will be in the program, It's up to you to if you like, focus on your own agenda. And there's always different funding opportunities, and invariably, whatever you want to do, there'll be some funding opportunity there that'll make it happen. What I'd say about these things is, rather than chasing after, I think Theresa mentioned it, don't be chasing the pot of money. Look, and the pot of money is the bonus to get what you want to get done. And to that end, I think strategic plans are desperately important. If you like, lead rather than be led. Create your own vision and work out what it is that you want to do. And then, if you like, formulate your plan about that, and then see how you can go and deliver on that. And I suppose in the context of strategic plans, I think it's very important to link in with, let's say, county councils, regional authorities, even the NPF, in terms of where you're setting yourself, in terms of, if you like, because strategically, if you're going to put an application together down the road, I think it's very important that you're linking into all of these different, like your pitch, if you like, identifies the important initiatives within all these things. And I suppose back to what was talked about earlier, I suppose fishing where the fish are. Like, it's quite clear the Green Deal is essentially, or greening in general, circular economy, carbon farming, all them sort of areas are where the agenda is at the moment. And I suppose that's a key part of if you like, the strategy where people are going. The other thing I would say about it, just from my own, I suppose, history of experience, the whole thing of being shovel ready when the time comes. The nature of these applications, they'll come at you at some stage, and there'll be a limited window to access the funding. And I think it's very important that people have the homework done, have the strategic plans done, let's say, whether there's planning permission needed, whether you need to identify partners in other parts of Europe or whatever, and be ready when it comes. Don't be running around then looking to see what you want to do. Make sure you're well ahead. And that's why a day like today is brilliant, because and even the last couple of days, they can get that thinking going and help develop things. So look, from my perspective, look, I can talk a little bit about what's going on in the Agriculture Committee. I suppose, look, the farm to fork strategy, biodiversity, the Green Deal again are all at the centre of it, and things around maybe carbon farming and sustainability as a whole are kind of the themes that are coming up a lot. But I suppose what I really be interested in today is asking two questions, I suppose. Is one, how can we work strategically together to access the most money from the European side? And secondly, what can we as MEPs do? As Maria says, we can listen. That's the most important thing to do. But equally beyond that, what can we do to really work collectively, to be part of that collective agenda, to try and bring as much funding and as much development, more so than funding, if you like, to realise a vision for the Northwest. And like everyone identifies that the Northwest is, if you like, not as developed as other regions. And this funding is all about trying to bridge that gap and, if you like, regenerate rural towns and rural economies. And it's a question of how we can all do that together. So I'll leave it at that and we'll go to questions.
Great, Colin, thank you very much. So again, if anybody has questions, and we want questions, if we can pop them into the chat box, and Maria and Colin will take them. Just a couple, maybe just to kick things off, Maria, just one of the areas we haven't really touched on this week, and I suppose it's been implied in everything that we've learned, is around the whole employment side. We hear about the whole, we were talking about there, the renovation wave and the work that's going to be done on nearly every building across Europe over the next 12 years or so to bring them up to standard. The whole renewable energy sector, the circular economy and the recycling and reusing of materials, and that there's going to be huge employment opportunities there. They're going to be different opportunities to what many of us would have left school, you know, thinking we were going to be. And for those maybe with children who are going to be coming out of school in the next while, you know, where should we really be thinking about trying to steer? Now, I know Solus have launched a new plan, and the government have, in the COVID context, have been very keen, you know, to ensure that we have reskilling opportunities and so on. But let's think further than that. You know, let's think, you know, where do we really need to be positioning ourselves in 10 or 15 years' time? And what is that opportunity in employment?
Yeah, absolutely. And delighted, you know, in many ways, the joint up thinking is happening. We just need to connect it a little bit quicker and tighter. So there seems to be a lot of work and talk going on in certain governments. I know here in the Parliament, you know, two big buzzwords is digitalization and future proofing. And they go hand in hand under the banner of the Green Deal. So if you look at, as you mentioned, retrofitting homes, as I had mentioned in my few words at the start, like how future-proofing, I think there's huge scope for us, particularly in our region of Midlands Northwest, to get ahead of the curve. And as much as Colm had just shared there in terms of strategic planning and the vision for Northwest regional areas is around apprenticeships and traineeships, looking at what what wind can deliver, what, as I mentioned, even that project using rooftops could bring to us in more urban areas. Looking at how universities and our third levels are providing courses to younger people coming through, and that we collectively move our mindsets to, you go into a role coming from college and you stay within that role for 40 years. I really believe that type of career development is completely washed. And COVID has allowed us to kind of explore a little bit differently, which is exciting, because we have people at home now predominantly working through tech and being given the opportunity to what remote working looks like for them and what side project they can develop and build on. But ultimately, we need to be able to provide the roadwork and the blueprint to that. But we can't do it from like one institution here, and be it the commission, the council, or the parliament, to everybody at home. It has to be a two-way street. So for me, a couple of holes that we need to tighten up, and again, that collective thinking needs to happen, is around looking at apprenticeships and traineeships, encouraging SMEs, large corporations, or the entrepreneur to look at how to future-proof, and you do that through pilot funding, joint up thinking, like Colm had said, in terms of other EU countries, what they're doing, and learn that two-way communication. And I can go off on a tangent in this because I'm quite passionate about it. It's just we encourage young people coming out of secondary school to go into third level education, and predominantly into like your NUIs, your Trinities, your UCDs, where in actual fact, I mean, not too far away from me is my bio agri school, like doing phenomenal work at that future proof in terms of how we farm, and I know Colm will get into farm to fork, and the future idea of what farming could look like, and how food is produced. But we really need to look at a young person, or a person as a whole, as a holistic being, and figure out the type of learning. And fundamentally, I believe, I was the generation that came out, that graduated as the financial crash was crashing. And we lost so many in terms of trade, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, to other countries. And you see the likes of New Zealand, Australia, Canada, America, in many ways, like booming when it comes to housing developments or that future proof. And we certainly can't allow COVID-19 to encourage another lost generation. So, and I'll finish up on this point. I remember I worked with a little bit with Bank of Ireland in Limerick City a number of years ago in their entrepreneurial space. And I remember talking to the managing director at the time for a car manufacturing company, and he had said he completely, when he moved in, he completely changed the mindset of what traineeships and apprenticeships look like for his company. So he instantly wrote to all secondary schools in his area, offered a 1-week program, particularly with TYs, or summer programs for junior certs and 5th years and leaving certs. Even first years were even encouraged to apply. And what he did is he threw down, in their first day, he threw down a piece of like an engine. And after the first day, if students weren't encouraged or inspired to break down the engine and rebuild it, then he knew, perhaps we had an honest conversation, like, maybe the mechanical side is not for you, but here's another department. That's future proofing, because it's a two-way street. It's a learning, it's providing options, and that trial and error. And I think for us, it's for the Northwest region, I think it's looking at what skill set we currently have and what skills we need, and predominantly that is looking at digital and green. Sorry, good on about.
No, that's great. No, thank you. Thank you. Colin, maybe just come back to your own work on the Agri and Rural Development Committee, and you mentioned there, and we've heard too earlier in the week around biodiversity. Farm to fork has been mentioned in dispatches too throughout the week as a key area. And looking at that too within the whole SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and what's going to happen there. As you mentioned too, the carbon farming, that sort of area. Again, looking to use the buzzword future proofing now. What should farming organizations or those who are involved in that sector really be looking out for in the next 10 to 12 years?
Well, certainly, I think I suppose from a CAP perspective, there'll be a lot of all that end of it will be very much around the biodiversity, partially carbon farming. And I suppose the farm to fork side of it is looking at a 30% organic. So there's going to be a big drive to a different model of agriculture, which in many ways might be a little bit challenging for Ireland in terms of, I suppose traditionally we would be a intensive agriculture in a lot of perhaps other parts of the country. But one of the big things perhaps is around the area of carbon farming, which will be very interesting in terms of carbon capture and how we manage our lands, that we ensure even in terms of what trees offer in terms of capturing carbon and how we manage our carbon sinks, be it obviously the peatlands is an emotive issue at the moment in terms of what they will do, what potential there is there for to capture carbon. But all types of grasslands and different areas like that are in a position to capture carbon, I suppose, is one. The other big area then is the whole area of energy. And energy is enormous in terms of whether it be the likes of PV on one side or wind energy. I think Simon mentioned a good lot about it there earlier. Even in the whole on land and offshore, I suppose, the idea of developing wind energy and various options in relation to energy is a key one that may be part of our future. I think the farming model is going to change a lot. It's going to be a lot about the management of our environment as much as it is about the produce we produce. The supply chain, if you like, farm to fork idea is to integrate the supply chain from the producer right up to the consumer as a holistic model. And that's something that I suppose we in Ireland, given that we export 90% of our produce, to ensure that we remain relevant and I suppose close to the consumer on the continent. And there can be an awful lot of opportunities in the supply chain area where businesses can create a kind of innovative product and get it to the market quicker, because the idea of reducing the number of steps in the food chain, the idea of less processed food is where that whole farm to fork strategy is going. And then if you tie that in with biodiversity and an aspiration to more organics type production, you're really looking at a model where you're creating a higher value, higher quality product for the premium end of the market. And that may be an opportunity, and do that alongside a bit of biodiversity, do that alongside a bit of perhaps carbon farming, and a kind of a more holistic rural management and agricultural kind of a different model of agriculture, I think is what we're looking at. And I suppose and one thing about that is there's going to be a transition to that in terms of various things. The like of smart technology has been mentioned, digitization has been mentioned. And I suppose there's certain fundamental blocks that we're going to it's been identified within the current CAP that the basics of broadband is going to be an essential point that we will need for the model of CAP that we're talking about into the future, where digitization is going to be part of it. And I think the progress that's coming has the opportunity to open the door to a lot of the challenges that we've had over the last 10 to 15 years in the agri sector, particularly around that digitization area and the idea of broadband, that we can, if you like, create an environment where, particularly even along a big issue that's there is the issue as regards part-time farming, and where part-time farmers are trying to match their agricultural business alongside let's say another enterprise they've gone. And the idea that people who may be a next generation who have moved away can come back to farm the land in their area, maintain the land in a more holistic way as well, and have the opportunities with proper infrastructure in place to hold in another job and make their whole, I suppose, their lives sustainable, their economies sustainable, and their communities sustainable. And I think that's that's key to where the more holistic model of where the CAP is going forward.
Okay, thanks, Colin. I'm going to ask John Daly to speak to a question that he has. John is from the Eastern and Midlands Regional Authority. John, maybe you might just like to speak to the point that you've raised there.
Good stuff. Thanks, David. I'm assuming you can hear me, David.
Can, loud and clear.
Great stuff. And just to say thank you to the panelists for taking the time out to speak to us today anyway. Yeah, just a quick question. And this is, I suppose, looking at the latest Q4 2020 CSO data. You would have seen a lot of the kind of counties in the Northwest region, you know, recording pretty low levels of say audited households with building energy ratings between A and B's, you know. And at the same time, and this is through work with the Southern Regional Assembly, I've been speaking to a lot of, say, university heads, education and training boards, you know, and a lot of them are kind of saying that there's a notably low demand level for training courses or just college courses with respect to, you know, environmental engineering and retrofitting. Obviously, you know, this is obviously going to be a big area for us going forward. You know, how does the panelists kind of see how we can encourage more people, whether they are just students or people in the construction industry now? How do they see we can get more people into these kind of courses to enhance our skills base, but also, you know, to help us achieve our kind of fitting targets? And just to give you an example, we were speaking to the head of the University of Limerick, and they had noted that that construction workers, you know, were very much kind of they wouldn't have had a great experience. Say, for example, some construction workers wouldn't have had a great experience with education, but they're the prime people that would want to get into retrofitting, and they were, you know, it's nearly a cultural issue that they don't want to go back to school in that sense, you know. So it's just great to get the panelists' views on that.
Okay, thanks, John. Colin, Maria, who wants to shoot first?
Will I go, Maria? Are you? Work away. You go. I know it's your expert.
Well, we're being uber polite. John, actually, and solid question. I'd almost love if we could chat offline too in terms of your research with speaking with heads of various departments and your experience. I mean, ultimately, we have a couple of opportunities. I think the way if you look at secondary education and the way we look at, I often like to say the highbrow academics, we're encouraging people to go to third level, predominantly university level, but we're not looking at tech or the technical institute in the same light, and we have to change that culture. I think programs like the TY opportunity could be a great space to look at the future proofing, like the apprenticeships and the traineeships that are on offer and could be further developed, so that you're moving into the final 2 years of secondary education with more understanding of what could be around or you could be doing, and then we got to work with. That's one avenue. The second avenue then is working with colleges to look at what in the area could we be looking at and needing in 5 to 10 years time, and I know David had mentioned it, and then roll that back to let's build the programs out now, and start attracting people into those spaces. And then that's the third level pillar, and then the second pillar, and then the third pillar is what can and how can we work with national governments, local governments, and then here in the European Parliament to develop funding opportunities. And I know Simon Harris had rolled out the apprenticeship program where an SME was getting €1,000 if they took on an apprenticeship, and I think it was 3,000 if the apprenticeship stayed on. Don't quote me on those numbers, but I can come back to you if I'm incorrect. Like those type of roles that are future proofing. So like, even if you look at Brexit, you know, we were aligning someone, or we were asking some organizations to pinpoint a person within the organization to deal fundamentally with Brexit and the upcoming and the changes. Like that should also be the case for future job opportunities and ways that we can develop our business, so that it's not left to the last and final hour. And much as Colm had said, looking at the strategic plan overall, but there's a couple of different areas And there would be the top ones where I see the future proofing coming from. And really we have to do, and I seen your question being asked, like, and just as you phrased it there, we have to do a huge body of work in terms of how we present apprenticeships and the world of trade, because for so long we've been encouraging and almost the only way to a better job is through a highbrow academic career, when in actual fact, you know, a student, you know, I can even say myself, like I was encouraged to go to university. I didn't get the points. I went to a PLC course in Galway Technical Institute, figured out what I didn't want to be, and then was able to scale up from that. But we are pushing people, younger people in particular, to know exactly what they want to be and who they want to be at 17, 18. And then they do an arts degree and they're coming out. And then the environment we've created for our communities and our businesses and themselves is so disconnected. And then we end up with younger people leaving the region. Rather than start from the bottom and really work up with the student to figure out what do we need as a region, and then what can they develop and offer. But I would love to hear your points, John, in terms of what you've learned and really have a good conversation that way.
Colin, I might just come to you on that preview, but just Anya Karen Leitrim County Council makes the point that it'd be great to see the Erasmus Plus used for work placements with apprenticeships, especially to countries with long-standing apprenticeship models. And actually in Leuven, we do that. We actually offer 14 students from Ireland twice a year the opportunity to come on a hospitality apprenticeship. And it is through Erasmus and the NWRA's funding programs that happens. So Anya is right, there is opportunities, probably underutilized, that we probably need to milk a little bit more and to get those students the opportunities to do so. But Colin, just going back on the question there that John asked, just your response on that.
Just on that point just there though, like I think people should look at the Erasmus Plus program. It's much more open program than it was previously, and gives much more opportunities than it did, even for people in work as well as students. So it's definitely a very positive. But getting back to the original question, to me it's right down to the respect of the role. I think it's a cultural change that we need in the country, where everyone wants their children to go off and do an academic course. And there's a lack of respect for the like of apprenticeships, or a lack of respect of the professions of apprenticeship. And like what I always say to people is, if you look around at people who work for themselves, who run their own business, an enormous amount of them were born out of apprenticeships. People who maybe employ 20, 30 people. There's two guys beside me here locally, one's an electrician and one's a carpenter. And the electrician has about 80 people working from, the carpenter has about 15 or 20 working from. And these are people who develop their own businesses. They've developed them out of the practical skills. And I think one of the things that was mentioned about the lack of engagement with the courses and the perception among the profession that the courses that they won't engage. I think the perception of the courses by some of the workers in the business is that they are academic too. And I know I've been around DKIT a lot, where a lot of the kind of more apprenticeship-based courses are rolled out as well. And they are extremely practical, some of these courses. And I think that the perception among the industry has to change, and the perception among the public, and the respect for anybody who comes through and develops their own business and runs a business. I suppose during the collapse of the construction sector, we'll say 10 years ago, there was a sense that there was a lot of people in it that maybe weren't running their businesses, or like there was questions asked over the nature of the business as a whole. But I would think there's an awful lot of brilliant people who develop their own businesses through the apprenticeship model, and actually found an activity that they were comfortable with. It's back to Marie's description of the fellow who picked up the engine and tried to put it back together, or the bits that they call it a gearbox or something different, and tried to put it back together. That if you develop skills that you have a natural affinity towards, that's where your career or your future should be. And certainly in this retrofitting era, there will be an enormous amount of opportunities for ordinary people to upskill to the potential of running their own businesses, being part of a transformation, and making a major contribution. And I have two brothers who went to university. One's a lecturer in Spain, and the other was in the IT sector. And I know it in them, and I know it in others, that there's nearly more of a respect for their role than the ordinary person who's done an apprenticeship. And yet the ordinary people who've done apprenticeships are now got 10 or 15 people working for them. By doing an apprenticeship, you actually can get further ahead. And I think we need to change a mindset in the country that has respect for these different types of roles. And that's something everybody has to do. And that's a big part of this, I think.
David, can I just add to that? Of course. Something Colm and I were briefly chatting about yesterday in terms of that Future of Europe conference that that is currently being discussed and being rolling out, and the impact it could have on our region is vast in terms of opening up conversation, lifting the umbrella, and the mindset that we have around apprenticeships, traineeships, and that future-proof role. And I would love to just throw it out to you all. Maybe we meet at a different point to literally look and discuss Future of Europe and what it means for our region, and ultimately connect all the dots that Colm just shared and John had asked the question for.
Okay, thanks for that, Maria and Colm. Patrick Vine in the NWRA. Patrick, you raised a question. Can you speak to that there?
Yeah, can you hear me, David?
I can, yes.
Hi, Maria and Colm. Just I suppose I'm working on a lot of EU projects and stuff, work with local authorities and all, and I suppose at a European, national and local level, there has always been a lot of talk about investment in green infrastructure and thinking of like greenways and cycling lanes and charging points for cars and all that, you know, and that's all important. And I think local authorities and governments are, you know, are very much in tune, and policy and stuff is changing. But to me, it kind of only works when the consumer is on board with it. And I'm thinking of like behavior change and getting from, you know, people to, you know, move out of their cars, you know, start cycling, things like, you know, reduction in fast fashion and just starting to eat a lot more local produce and shortening that food supply chain. And I suppose I'm just thinking even in the last year or two, you know, I was really surprised by the carbon emissions by things like fashion, like creating clothes and concrete. And so I suppose it's an awareness thing. But I mean, again, the point is really just that, is there anything the EU Green Deal can do through either projects and stuff to encourage behaviour change? And I suppose in a lot of ways, it's a cultural change as well as the investment in infrastructure, because I don't think, you know, it's all well and good having, you know, the infrastructure there provided by government, but the consumer, there's a behaviour change there required as well. I suppose, just is there anything in terms of the EU Green Deal and, you know, we should be doing in terms of applying for projects or stuff like that?
Okay, Colm, I might ask you to start first on this one. We can.
Look, I think it's an absolute requirement as part of all of the strategies around the Green Deal. Like if you even look back in terms of, let's say, the likes of green flags in schools and educating at every level. Like I think if you go back through the leader programs over the years, there's always been a significant portion of the budgets have been allocated towards educational programs. And I think it's probably, just as you outlined there, it's probably more relevant than ever. It's no different than what we're saying about the apprenticeships. There needs to be a recognition. Like it's amazing what you can, when children come home from school and have been educated about where the energy is lost, even things like fast fashion, how they influence other people in the family. So I think definitely at all levels we have to integrate. You see, it's easy to say we need this in a technical sense, but what you're describing there is we have to break it back down so the ordinary person appreciates the impact by taking simple changes in their lives, be it in their practices, equally in the energy saving, be it in their house or commuting to work or whatever, the difference that actually makes. And if we don't make that real to people, that they understand the impact that their actions, their negative actions are having, or their potential positive actions could have, then we won't implement change. And I think that we all too often try to almost force people into change. If we can encourage people to change or educate people into change, I think it's way more important. And I definitely think in terms of strategies going forward, that a clear element has to be recognised, that it is this mindset change that's going to be the biggest part. Everything else can happen if we change the mindset. And I think that's the place we have to start from. And I think definitely an investment in the educational side and the promotional side to identify, like what you say, what the carbon footprint of concrete is, for instance. fast fashion, like, to me, it's funny because the young generation tell us all that they're the ones that's going to save the world, whereas they're the ones that are using the fast fashion. So people have to align their principles with their actions at all ages, in agriculture, in every sector, and we have to basically that educational piece is, to me, it's the foundation of making everything else happen. And I think that's what we have to invest in as much as anything else.
And thanks, Colm. Maria, do you want to come in then on that point?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, picking up from Colm's points, in terms of even the green flag, or we look at and we work quite closely with Blue School programs that connect what happens in Europe to home, and that might be an interesting space to develop further PR opportunities and education around, what does the future look like. I would be really pressing for the Future of Europe conference to include the language, Patrick, that you just shared, because you often don't hear that when we talk about funding or grants. It's like, I think might be a bit too lofty, but I think as difficult and as traumatic as the COVID pandemic has been for many across Ireland and the world, Mother Earth has put us right on her axis again, and now we have people that are appreciating what's on their doorstep, are understanding that quick runs to fast fashion outlets is not the way that serves us, and buying locally will ultimately sustain us longer, and it is provide couple areas. It is providing language and understanding around that means, and you do that through education streams. You also do it through conversations like this, roundtables, and I see I over the campaign in 2019, I saw a really successful way of linking community members to new community members through, I think it was in Manor Hamilton, where you had castles and ruins, and a local entrepreneur had moved in and developed a completely different way of talking about what the runes meant in historical context through technology, and that sparked interest within the local school to understand more about what technology can deliver at a local area. I think more programs like that, and we're celebrating, we're talking about it, it certainly helps people feel more confident in looking at what's on their doorstep. But you're right in the sense of we have an opportunity now. I think every 100 years, I read some sort of pandemic hits, and it's what we do and how we build after this is fundamentally going to either keep Mother Earth happy or not. And I think COVID has just gifted us, again, as I said, to look closer to home and more sustainable. But similar to what Joe, I'm sure Colm would be saying, like, the work that you're doing, we'd love to, I'm not speaking for you, Colm, sorry, but we would love to hear more about it, because the info sharing is really important. So when we go out to schools, when we talk to businesses, we're singing from the same hymn sheet about what is possible and how to do better.
Great, thanks. Dennis Kelly also asked a question. I'm going to ask Dennis to maybe speak to his question, but also Dennis, as a member in the NWRA, just going back to one of Colm's questions in terms of working strategically. Maybe you might, if you can, if I'm not putting you on the spot, maybe if you could talk to in terms of, what we've done this week, working strategically, working with our European representatives in Colm and Maria, and how we can try and be a bit more cohesive in terms of both accessing funding, but also, and we'll come to it secondly, the issue of around policy and implementing or influencing policy.
Thank you, David. I take it you can hear me okay?
I can, thanks, yeah.
Thanks very much indeed. And David, can I just say thanks very much you've been a perfect host during the week, and I found that it's been an actually brilliant exercise over his last 3 days. And I suppose Barry Guckian in the background and Katrina Meehan as well have been very much central in getting a fantastic program of speakers, etc., together. What I suppose when I look at this, I've been involved with my team in preparing a region spatial and economic strategy, and that has been set within the context of the national planning framework. And we very much see the national planning framework as being front and center of everything we do. And I suppose one of the huge issues that has been arising has been the way this region, and we've heard it all week, of being a region in transition. And it has also been recognised by the Commission as a lagging region. And we have had our own evidence provided by John Daly, who we heard earlier, the economist, speaking on behalf of the 3 regional assemblies. And there's some evidence on that where we have demonstrated the legacy of underinvestment in this region. And yet this region has huge, huge potential. And I suppose what I'd be wondering is we see the acceptance in the EU that there's something going seriously wrong in the northern and western region. We recognise it in the northern and western region, and I wonder whether it is fully recognised at national level, particularly when you look at some of the investment decisions that have been made over this last couple of weeks. And it's not a political comment I'm making. That is something that is very strongly felt by the elected members on the regional assembly, and it has been and continues to be articulated. So I suppose one of my questions to ourselves is, what do we do to change this mindset? Because the Green Deal is the strategy for the future. And we need to ensure that there is investment being made and appropriate investment in this region. I suppose the other thing, if I could maybe ask people to think about, is where do we feel the best opportunities are for the large scale commercial energy production in this region? How can we bring the communities with us? And how can we best ensure that communities participate in and I suppose benefit from the energy production that potential that we would have? So I suppose that's just at a particularly high level, and it's truthfully to try and see what way we should be bringing this subject onto the agenda, and how can the EU help?
Okay, Maria, I might start back with you on this one, if that's all right.
Yeah, this is where I wish you started with Colin.
All right.
I mean, Dennis, I mean, I think that's a valued point. And ultimately, we're a region in transition because we haven't invested both time, both energy and funding into our region, and let's call a spade a spade. And the further we move into the transition, I think it's comfortable for a lot of people to say we're in the region. We moved back and moved into region of transition because of Brexit. In some ways, rightly so, and in other ways, we've been a region in transition for many generations, and how we collectively work together. I think how it changes, and correct me if I'm wrong in answering your question. Maybe I've picked it up wrong, but joint thinking helps. Talks like this help. Understanding what's going on, and that people are not working in a silo manner, and much to Colin's point earlier, the strategic plan for the overall vision for the region is discussed in many different rooms and in many different offices, and in classrooms as well. To change this mindset, yeah, I mean, lobbying helps, but it certainly is not the lobbying at an institution or in Dublin certainly helps, but we need to. I mean, I get lost in this question a little bit because we could make investments, and the government and the European Parliament and the EU as a whole could invest in this region, but ultimately, if we have communities that are not buying into it, then we continue to be a region in transition in certain areas, and then other areas are promising and developing and moving forth. So it has to be a two-way street, and you do that through. I think you do that through communities coming together, understanding. One point, Yude, how do you feel the best opportunities are for energy production? I think one really successful programme, and perhaps many had come across it, is in Killala, County Mayo, where a community group came together to future-proof their community and ultimately purchased land from a farmer, built wind turbines or installed them, and now are making money off that. And the co-op group that developed it is now further developing their schools, providing SME support for their businesses, so people don't leave the small town of Killala and they stay within that because they have expertise at their fingertips. And then the schools are always constantly involved in the future proof. I think that's a really, really successful pilot project that could ultimately connect some of the dots that you have there. They have to see it to believe it. But maybe Colm has a more joint up thinking with his experience. And I'd love to hear from other people on the floor to see what they feel.
Okay, Colm, we'll hand it to you.
Thanks, and thanks Maria for having such faith in me.
Yeah, you're taking.
I hope the smile on his face means that he's appreciative of what you've happened.
He's holding the baton.
To be honest, it is. Can I have a week on this? Because it's exactly where I see it all at. But look, I suppose at two levels. It's the first one was about how you regenerate the region by with people and with opportunities. That's the way I'd see it. And at a very basic level, the COVID thing has taught us about remote working, and like we need the broadband, we need the opportunities that people can work in, that the young people don't have to go away, start a career in Dublin or in Paris or wherever they choose to go to, London or whatever, and start a career and suddenly build up a network there that gets them disconnected from at home. And I think we need to be able to create opportunities that people can spend a couple of days a week at home. The remote working, it'll become a boring trend after a while, but it's a real reality that has to happen. And we have to put the basic infrastructure in place for that, the like of the broadbands, the like of, you can talk about remote working hubs to a lesser degree, but the infrastructure around remote working has to be provided. That's on that side of it. I think, look, we could go into it in great detail, but that would be a big part of what I said before, was turning the brain drain into the brain gain. And I think that's what you have to do in terms of creating the opportunities for people to work in their own communities. And that in itself is a massive multiplier to the rest of the businesses in that community. Then creating things around like regeneration of main streets and incentivizing that and supporting it with retrofitting programs and possibly even the like of tax breaks and things like that as well. That whole regeneration piece has to be seriously invested in. On the energy side, look, to my mind, you have your bioenergies, your PVs and your winds. In the west of Ireland, I think, I know it's something, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Simon would have a bit of knowledge in this area. I'm actually sitting beside where there's Oriel wind farm is just been constructed just off the coast from me here by indeed a Belgian company based in Ardennes. Park Wind are a stakeholder in it. And like the opportunities in the west of Ireland in terms of offshore wind is enormous. That's one thing. It's probably a long-term win, but then if you want a long-term win, you have to start and invest gradually over time. I think there's major opportunities there. There's major opportunities onshore in terms of wind and PV and bioenergy. One of the things that Maria touched on is kind of community investment in that. If you take the Oriel wind farm here, there'll be a community fund created out of that people can access. There'll be a local community gain. And for any of these things to happen, there has to be a recognition that it has to involve a community element as well. That if you're going to put wind turbines up in an area and you want the goodwill of the community not to have objections, then they have to see a win out of it from their end as well. So I think, look, in terms of where the opportunities are on the energy side, I was just talking to someone recently about, let's say, a Cavan Monaghan area where a bioenergy, let's say methane or anaerobic digestion and all that may have a part to play. I think certainly the wind and PV are the two big ones going forward, particularly in the West Coast. The wind, it could be a big industry there could be a big service industry to an offshore wind potential on the West Coast that could be a bit of a game changer employment wise. As regards to brain drain, I just think it's so important that we stop talking about putting the infrastructure in place and make sure it's put in place, because simple bit. We talk about everything, not traveling to work, if you like, all the different things that it provides in terms of congestion, of lifestyle, of all that presents is totally playing into the Green Deal. And we'll talk about the trendy things and not get the simple things right. I couldn't emphasize enough the broadband and the infrastructure supporting remote working. And I do think there's massive opportunities in the area of wind, particularly offshore wind, if we can get it to work right, and onshore, but we need community buy into that. PV, and I think there's also then the whole area behind this is, if you take the energy sources you're talking about there, particularly wind, the idea of energy storage and let's say whether it be creating hydrogen or methods of storing energy, and then some of these things are trendy and then the science moves away from them. But the real thing we want is the partnerships with our educational institutions. Like, a lot of the Green Deal is based around taking the big problems and find the solutions from top down as well. So if you can invest in the expertise through universities, even through PhD students or whatever, and identify where the real solutions are, and be the ones to come up with the innovative solutions around the big issues. And energy storage is one of the big issues. And that would open the door to wind energy in a big way. So I definitely think the whole energy sector and the support sector behind it offers it. Like, if you looked at Ostend and you look at what's done in Belgium, there's no reason why we can't replicate the like of them sort of scenarios on the west coast of Ireland. And then, just to reiterate, the working from home, the broadband, the allowing people to remain in their own community, support their parents as they get old, play for the local football team, buy their cup of coffee in the local shop, you know, breathe life into the centre, back into the centre of our villages and towns. It is so important. And we could talk about all the nice things on the fringes, but we have to get the stuff at the heart of it right. And that's the first building block to me, is that whole broadband piece has to be sorted out for once and for all.
Okay, thanks, Colin. I think that's an important point. All right, and certainly we've seen deficiencies, you know, with people who are trying to work at this time without infrastructure like that, and we have to put those priorities right. I just want to come to one final question, conscious of time too. We try and keep to schedule, and it's coming back to Colum's second question that he raised in terms of what, as MEPs, you know, can the MEPs do? But I want to frame it too on a point though that Maria raised, which again wasn't mentioned this week, and it's something maybe for completely another day, is around the whole future of Europe. And the convention that's going to take place around that. And as Colin had said too, in terms of the policies that are in place, when people come to the stage that they're looking for funding, the programs are already in place and what's in there is in there. And both of those things have to change. We need to have, as Andrea said in the last presentation, we have to have a more bottom-up approach to Europe. And I've spoken with this, Brendan Mooney, and I have spoken about this in the NWRA, about, you know, when we work around Europe, we need to communicate it more, but we also need to involve from a bottom up that approach. And the MEPs have a role in that ladder in terms of bringing that information to committees and commission and so on. But it is important that as citizens and as activists and as people who are working in this space, that we feed that information to the MEPs very much. And maybe Colin is relatively or brand new, if I can say it, Maria, you know, a couple of years ahead in terms of the experience, but yet it's still great to see, you know, what would you want in terms of that engagement, you know, going forward from community groups to try and input into policy. Colin, I'll start with you. You have your mic off, so I'll start there.
Fair. Fine. Look, I suppose I wouldn't like it to be thought I wasn't in favour of bottom up. I spent my life writing strategies and plans for leader companies and all sorts. So I think it's vital that it is bottom up. And I think people need to lead in terms of knowing what they want and push back in terms of just a pre-prescribed plans. But one thing, it's the future of Europe is one thing, but there's also a strategy around the rural areas, specifically identifying a strategy for rural areas in Europe. That's currently, there's a conversation with that as well. I think that's just as important as the overall future of Europe scenario. But definitely in terms of the creating of plans and the need for it to be bottom up. And like, if someone feels they own something, they'll be more engaged in it. And I think that's where this all starts from. But where our part of it is I suppose, an engagement on the future of Europe, an engagement on a strategy for rural areas in Europe, that we make sure that gets down to the people and that the ordinary person's feedback on that and what matters to them is where it goes. And I think that's really nearly as much the MEP's role as anybody's, or it's nearly one of the most important things an MEP could do, is that to bring that engagement of the ordinary person to the policy. That's really what our role is in short, is to bring that engagement. And I'd like to think that we, as people who would have come through a system of at lower levels in terms of developing plans and the frustration of where plans didn't match where the need was. And the question is, what can we do for Europe? Where can we work collectively together? The point is, we need an ongoing conversation, and whether that's through a regional authority, or whether it's through Leuven or Leuven, should I say, or where that's I think today is a bit about that, about starting those links, about continuing that communication. And I know the Committee of the Regions is a vital part of that, and I think we need to keep the dialogue going and the engagement, and certainly when it comes to the future of Europe. I know myself and Maria were just talking about it yesterday, about our desire to actually make sure that that gets into every community in Ireland, and that everybody gets talking, and they feel that they own where that's going in the future, and it doesn't become about some disconnected bureaucrat writing an agenda. That will play out over the next year or two. And we were just talking about it yesterday, we really would like to get on the ground and engage with people to make sure that vision is a people's vision and not a Brussels vision, if you like. So certainly we're going to be putting our thinking caps on in terms of how we can engage with communities in that regard. And I suppose to be able to do it, I'm a big believer in doing it through, like someone mentioned there, the NPF earlier, National Plan Framework, and then the regional planning strategies and the cascade effect down to development plans and all that. And that's what we want. We want to get a cascade of people from, be it the European, the Committee of the Regions, down to councillors, the Parliament, down to the individuals on the ground, that to get that connected and have one collective conversation over the next year or two, that we can shape a vision that we believe is our vision. And I know we're going to be putting our hats on in terms of thinking caps on in terms of what we can do to engage meaningfully with people and to have them part of that. And I would see the regional authorities, the Committee of the Regions, the county councillors, the various stakeholders, the county councils, all as part of that. And if we can all do it together, we actually can have something that pushes back and says, this is actually what we want, not that. And I know, for an example, I'm not going to put my own opinion into it, but there's a massive debate about one-off houses in rural Europe. And that's something I'm particularly pointed in this country. That's something where we all have to come to a position on whatever it is, and either live with it or go with it, one or the other. And I think it's conversations about the ordinary things, about getting the opportunity to get them jobs back into the regional parts of Europe that are absolutely vital, and absolutely vital that people engage in this process, because that's a bit of a pitch. I think that's on that side of it. But I think back to the funding end of these programs, I'd welcome a regular engagement with the stakeholders at let's say regional authority level, but equally in the various institutions along the way, where we keep the conversation on an ongoing basis. And I know Marie would be of the same mind, that we basically, if we create the links, the information we have will pass over. Equally, people can say to us about where they see things are wrong, and we can flag that in terms of Parliament or committee work. But it's all down to good communication. Everything else can come. The other thing we get is we get an awful lot of ideas from other countries, proposals as pitches from, let's say, even lobby groups that may actually work in the community, and sometimes they never get back. The ideas never get back to the ground, and that's it. We can be a conduit for all of that, but I suppose to find the appropriate vehicles to allow that happen. And I think the college could be one. I think the regional authorities could be another. And that's certainly one role that I would say is a massive part that we have to play over the next couple of years. And I suppose today's part of let's start building an ongoing conversation, an ongoing structure of how that can happen. And I'd say that's as much a pitch as it is an answer, if you like.
And thanks, Colm and Maria, to just follow on from that.
Yeah, and just to echo what Colm has shared there, I think you know, a couple of things came up over repeatedly, regardless whether I was in a rural or urban area, be it in any way, in anywhere across the constituency over the EU campaign in 2019. It was mental health, and then access to funding was the second. That community groups and organizations were applying for funding, were being told not have, you know, would be told 3 months later that they didn't qualify, and never given a reason to the reasons why and why not, would be told to reapply, and they'd almost go through a handful of those stop go systems, which is completely broken. So for me, and ultimately the reason why I decided to run is the fact that the disconnect, that what happens here and looking at Europe as just a pot of money versus the two-way conversation ultimately and desperately needs to change. And I guess to your point and what Colm was sharing, this is a great start. I think this needs to continue. I think this needs to continue on a regular basis. You know, a couple of things that came up last week for me at local meetings was a sense of people were spending months looking even for other community groups across Europe to do joint funding. I mean, that's where the MEPs and we come in. We have access to networks that we can find information like that quite quickly, to really lean on us. And then it is ultimately to share a conversation like, do you think this is possible? How do we go about that? And the roadmap gets built together. And I think that's where sustainability wins, that it's not, you know, one, as much as Colm was sharing, not one decision is made at one end of the road, and then it filters down to those who might be in the know or might be on a mailing list for Europe funding, where actually the case of communities have opportunity to enrich themselves through their MEPs and through the funding streams, as well as the many other areas that the European Union and us buying into that mentality has. A couple of things that make me nervous in terms of the future of Europe is the fact that I did a couple of roundtables, one roundtable last week with some third level student union officers, and I'd asked the question, you know, what's their thoughts and their wants from the future of Europe. And what was super interesting is they were very nationalistic in their asks. And I get that given a lot that's going on for third level students right now, but I probed the questions again and they're like, to be honest with you, we're not even thinking about that. Considering the likes of Erasmus is geared towards those students, and the further away we move, and fortunately the way we move away from why the European Union started in the first place, the more we need to work harder in ensuring the what happens here is done so at the benefit of our citizens, and that they feel like they're buying into the union and where it's going. And yeah, just to finally echo, like, more of this, please. I think a lot of people think they have to go through correct channels, or they don't want to, you know, they might have a small ask and they'll just wait and wait until they find someone. Whereas, you know, Colm and our job are to communicate and connect with local organizations and community groups. And if we know about something, then we can work. And often the fact it's you might see an information sooner than we would, and the two-way conversation is vital there, because then we're on the same page and we can move forward for a better region. And ultimately in 2024, you know, I know myself, again, I'll include Colm in this, sorry, is the fact that we're going out into communities knowing that we work together, we are meeting people not for the first time, but collectively we've built a stronger region because of our joint up thinking, and what can happen, that it doesn't happen at a black white sheet of a paper in an office that you've never connected with. It's really, really important that conversation and communication happens. So yeah, David, putting more ass and emphasis on you and the many in the Northwest Regional Assembly is to do that. And I could go on about funding, but Theresa Lenihan's on the call and she's my go-to person for funding when I have questions and I'm confused. So I won't even entertain that in terms of right now. I've sent more groups to you, but I feel like I'm blacklist.
Great. Well, look, thank you very much, Maria. Great note to finish on. And I think you're right. Yes, certainly in the NWRA, you know, they have been very proactive in terms of trying to engage citizens with the European project. And I know that they certainly will continue. For those who haven't seen, Joe Lowe just posted in the chat that Rural Vision Week is starting on the 22nd of March through the European Network for Rural Development. And this is a great opportunity for a bottom-up to start feeding into those policies that Colm was talking about. Thank you, Colm. Thank you, Maria, to bring our week to an end. It has been a very good week, very interesting week, an awful lot of information. As I said, we will circulate the presentations and the recordings will be posted then online so people can digest the information at leisure and make good sense of it. The NWRA, the contact points and everybody else who has been part of this are available should people have any further questions or comments that they wish to raise with them. I want to thank Katrina, Barry, Pauline and the director of the NWRA, David Minton, for the initiative in bringing this together. As the NWRA have been over the last number of years very proactive in this area, and I know that we will be doing further work with them in the future. We hope too that we'll be able to invite everybody to Leuven when we once can again. Maria has been great in receiving many of the groups that we've sent in when we could, and I know Colm will receive them too when we get back to that, and we look forward to that as well. So said, thank you to everybody. Thank you to all the speakers during the week, to everybody today, to the staff in the NWRA, and we look forward to doing this at some point again in the future.
Can I maybe just before I go, can I just also acknowledge and thank David for his fantastic contribution in facilitating the 3 days and also putting the event together. It was extremely impressive and extremely useful, and we look forward to working with David again in the future. And also just to echo what David said and thank all the contributors and the speakers.
Grand. Thanks, Barry. So without any more thanking, we'll say goodbye and enjoy your lunch. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.